seated. Good morning. This is the case of State of Ohio plaintiff versus George Washington Wagner IV, defendant, case number 2018 CR 155. Today is September 12, 2022, and we continue proceedings in the trial of this matter. Good morning to the jury. Glad to see you're all here. Present today is the defendant with his attorneys John Parker and Richard Nash. The State of Ohio is represented by Rob Junk, prosecuting attorney, and special prosecutors Angela Canepa and Andrew Wilson. Also, Ryan Scheiderer of the Ohio BCI&I is present. It's the court's understanding that the state has designated Mr. Scheiderer to stay at counsel table as a representative of the law enforcement agency involved in the investigation. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
Today, the court will give some preliminary instructions to the jury, after which there will be opening statements by counsel. Prior to doing that, are there preliminary matters that need to be brought to the court's attention?
Your Honor, as we discussed previously, both parties are moving for a separation of witnesses, which is traditional in any case. But we have agreed that that shall go into effect after opening statements at the first time somebody testifies.
That's correct, Your Honor.
All right. The court will grant that joint motion and order a separation of witnesses. That means that, and that will be effective after opening statements. Anyone who is to be called as a witness in this case may not be present in the courtroom following opening statements until called to testify. Any witness who does testify may not discuss his or her testimony with any other prospective witness. Violations of that order can result in sanctions, including the exclusion of testimony. It's the court's understanding, too, that counsel wishes that to apply to any, prevent any prospective witness from viewing, listening to, or reading anything about any other testimony. Is that correct?
That's correct, Judge.
That is correct, Your Honor.
All right, and that order will be applied also to any written or recorded testimony. That no witness who is to be called can view, listen to, or read anything concerning other testimony until called. The court does have some preliminary instructions, ladies and gentlemen, that I want to advise you of. It may help you follow, if you follow these instructions, it may help you in performing your duties as jurors in this case. Jury service is somewhat strange, I'm sure, to all of you. Even if you've served as a juror before, it's not something you've done often, so an explanation may be helpful. Those who participate in a trial must do so in accordance with established rules. And that's true of witnesses, it's true of the lawyers, it's true of the judge, and also true of the jurors. The lawyers present the evidence according to those rules. The judge enforces the rules and determines what evidence may be admitted. You will be the sole judges of the facts, the credibility of the witnesses, and the weight to be given to their testimony. Now later, the court will instruct you as to the law that applies to the case, and you will apply that law to the facts as you find them. It is your sworn duty to apply the law as given to you by the court. The procedure for trial is as follows. First, counsel will outline what they expect the evidence will be. These are referred to opening statements is what how they're referred to, and these opening statements of counsel are not evidence, but they are a preview of the claims of each party, and they are designed to help you follow the evidence as it is presented. Then the state offers its evidence. Now, the defendant may but need not offer evidence. If the defendant presents evidence, then the state may present rebuttal evidence. The trial then concludes with the arguments of counsel, sometimes referred to as summation, then the instructions of law given to you by the court, and thereafter you will deliberate concerning your verdict. It is important that you be fair and attentive throughout the trial. Do not discuss this case among yourselves or with anyone else. This includes family, friends, and media. You must not post or read anything about this case on the internet or any electronic device, including cell phones. This would include blogs and social networking sites such as MySpace, Facebook, Twitter, and others. Any such discussion, if discovered, could lead to a mistrial and would severely compromise the rights of the parties to a fair trial. Do not permit anyone to discuss this case with you or in your presence. Do not form or express any opinion on this case until it is finally submitted to you. It may perhaps be more difficult for you to understand that you may not discuss this case among yourselves until it is finally submitted to you. The reason is that you will receive the opening statements of counsel, the evidence, the closing arguments of counsel, and the law in that order. And it would be unfair to discuss the case among yourselves before you receive everything necessary for your decision. You should explain this rule prohibiting the discussion of the case to your family and friends. When the trial is over and your jury duty is completed, you will then be released from this admonition, and you at that time may but are not required to discuss the case and your experiences as a juror. You are instructed not to talk to the attorneys, parties, witnesses, or anyone else that participates in the trial. Likewise, they may not talk with you. You must not talk with anyone else about this case during the trial. If anyone should attempt to discuss this case with you, report the incident to me or to one of the court's employees immediately. Do not investigate or attempt to obtain additional information about this case from any source outside the courtroom. Now, this includes revisiting any of the places that you were taken on the jury view. You were instructed not to view pictures obtained on your own, including those obtained on the internet, such as Google Earth and others. Viewing the scene in an unauthorized manner, viewing pictures or other materials without the benefit of explanation in court is unfair to the parties who need you to decide this case solely on the evidence presented in the courtroom. You are prohibited from performing your own experiments and conducting your own research, including internet research. Such information may be incomplete, inaccurate, or irrelevant to the issues in the case. It is vital that you carefully follow these instructions. The reason is simple. The law requires that you consider only the testimony and evidence you hear and see in the courtroom. You may consider and decide this case only upon the evidence received at the trial. If you acquire any information from an outside source, you must report it immediately to the bailiff of the court or one of the employees of the court who are performing bailiff duties, and they will report it to me. You are instructed not to read, view, or listen to any report in the newspaper, radio, or television on the subject of this trial. Do not permit anyone to read or comment upon them to you or in your presence. Media reports may be incomplete or inaccurate. You may consider and decide this case only upon the evidence received at the trial. If you acquire any information from an outside source, you must not report it to other jurors, and you must disregard it in your deliberations. In addition, you shall report and should report the outside source of information to one of the court's employees or to the judge at the first opportunity. All or portions of these proceedings may be broadcast, photographed, and or recorded by members of the news media. You must not allow this fact to divert your attention from this case or to interfere with your duties as jurors. Further, you are not allowed to talk to members of the media during this trial. Any violation of these orders may require a new trial and may subject those involved to sanctions, including contempt of court. The court will permit, I haven't asked counsel about this, but it would be typically the court's position that note-taking should be permitted in a trial of this length. Is that acceptable with counsel for each side?
It is, Your Honor.
Yeah.
It is, Your Honor.
The court will permit those jurors who desire to take notes during the trial to do so. We'll provide you with those notepads, and we'll probably do that even prior to opening statement. No juror is required to take notes. The taking of notes is entirely a matter of personal choice for each juror. The fact that the notes taken by a juror support his or her recollection in no way makes his or her memory more reliable than that of the jurors who do not take notes. Do not let the taking of notes divert your attention from what is being said or is happening in the courtroom during the trial. Some persons believe that taking notes is not helpful because it may distract a person's attention and interfere with hearing all the evidence. All notes are confidential and for the consideration of the jury only. Each note taker will leave his or her notes on his or her chair during the recesses and until deliberations begin. At that time, you will be allowed to take your notes to the jury room. All notes will be returned to the court reporter for destruction after the time the jury is discharged, or at the time the jury is discharged. Jurors will not be permitted to ask questions of the witnesses. It is the responsibility of the lawyers to present all the evidence necessary for you to decide the issues in this case. If during the trial issues arise that would affect your ability to pay attention and sit as a fair and impartial juror, you must explain the matter to the bailiff of the court or one of the employees of the court acting as bailiffs, who will inform me. At any time, if you cannot hear a witness, an attorney, or me, please make that fact known immediately by raising your hand. As to each offense charged in the indictment, the defendant is presumed innocent unless and until his guilt is established beyond a reasonable doubt. As to each offense charged in the indictment, the defendant must be acquitted unless the state produces evidence which convinces you beyond a reasonable doubt of every essential element of each such offense charged. I've used the term reasonable doubt, and at this time I will define that term for you. Reasonable doubt is present when the jurors, after they have carefully considered and compared all the evidence, cannot say they are firmly convinced of the truth of the charge. It is a doubt based on reason and common sense. Reasonable doubt is not mere possible doubt, because everything relating to human affairs or depending on moral evidence is open to some possible or imaginary doubt. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is proof of such character that an ordinary person would be willing to rely and act upon it in the most important of the person's own affairs. You are the sole judges of the facts, the credibility of the witnesses, and the weight of the evidence. To weigh the evidence, you must consider the credibility of witnesses. You will use the tests of truthfulness which you use in your daily lives. These tests include the appearance of each witness upon the stand, the witness's manner of testifying, the reasonableness of the testimony, the opportunity the witness had to see, hear, and know the things about which the witness testified, the witness's accuracy of memory, frankness or lack of it, intelligence, interest, and bias, if any, together with all the facts and circumstances surrounding the testimony. Use these tests and assign to each witness's testimony such weight as you think proper. You are not required to believe the testimony of any witness simply because the witness was under oath. You may believe or disbelieve all or any part of the testimony of any witness. It is your duty to decide what testimony to believe and what testimony not to believe. The testimony of one witness, if believed by you, is sufficient to prove any disputed fact. I may remind you of these instructions from time to time. If I overlook that, however, they nevertheless apply to your conduct throughout this trial. Now, by now you each found your parking place out here inside the fence, I would assume. And since you now know where that is, it will be easier each succeeding day for you to find where to park. If any of you need work slips for your employer for employment purposes, see one of the employees of the court or the clerk, and we'll make sure you get a work slip. There may, from time to time, be bench conferences, whispering at the bench. You are totally to ignore that. It's not that those conferences are not meant for the jury. You know where our restrooms are by now. We've had a few days here in the courtroom, so you know where they are, and they are what they are. But and hopefully we'll have no problems that way. We'll try to accommodate anybody who needs a restroom trip. You've got juror badges. I see that you're all wearing your badges. We'll be sending those home with you. That's a little different than we normally do, but since we have specific parking places for you, those identify you as jurors. Try to remember to wear them each day so you'll be identified when you get into the juror parking places. Let me just say, too, if you forget your badge and you're halfway here, don't turn around and go back to get your badge and make yourself late for court. Come on to court, identify yourself, say you forgot your badge, and we'll make sure that you get in where you need to be. But try to remember to wear your badges. If you have any problems at all, tell one of the people serving as bailiff of the court. We'll try to take care of each problem in an expeditious manner. Does counsel wish me to give any other advisements at this time?
No, thank you, Judge.
No, Your Honor.
All right. We begin every trial, ladies and gentlemen, with opening statements. You will see throughout the course of this trial that frequently the state of Ohio is required to go first and then the defendant to go second. That's true of opening statements as well. Again, the order in which we proceed at trial is a matter of longstanding procedure, and we're required to follow it in this trial. Opening statements are not evidence and may not in themselves be weighed as evidence. They may, however, be very useful to you as jurors in understanding the evidence as it's presented. Now, the prosecuting attorney, if prepared to go forward at this time, may begin your opening statement.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start this with an apology because I think we owe you an apology, and also, again, gratitude for your patience throughout this process. We've tried to warn you that it's going to be a long process, and you guys persevered regardless of those warnings. But starting back in July, when you showed up at the gymnasium and filled out, a 20-page questionnaire, and then showed up for individual questioning, and then again for general questioning, and then literally weathered a jury view, 2-day jury view, where it was kind of hot on that bus, I think. And then the delay. We sincerely apologize for the delay that happened. None of us wanted that to happen. Obviously, we have 6 alternate jurors in case something happens to one of you original 12, but we don't have that ability if something happens to the participants. So, again, I apologize for that. We all would have liked to have started this last week, especially when the jury view was still fresh in your mind. Especially, it would be nice to be sitting here saying we have 1 week under our belts of a 6 to 8 week trial, right? But again, our apologies for that and our gratitude for you to continue persevering. Also, thanking you in advance for the amount of patience that you're going to have to show over the next 6 to 8 weeks. We will be trying to streamline this as much as possible. So, we will try not to call 12 witnesses if we can do it with 2 or whatever the case may be. One of the things that you might see us doing is calling a witness more than once. And we're doing that because we want to present this case to you in a chronological fashion so that it makes sense. So, for instance, our ballistics expert, for instance, did some work at the beginning of the case and then very at the tail end and some in the middle, right? Well, it wouldn't make much sense for him to sit up here and talk about the tail end of things when you guys haven't even been introduced to that evidence, okay? So in that fashion, you might see us doing that with some of our witnesses. So we won't be able to offer you that explanation then, so I'm offering it to you now. Additionally, what's I going to say? Oh, we might have to call jurors or witnesses out of order. I just got done saying we're going to try to present it to you in a streamlined fashion so that it makes sense chronologically. But due to schedules and stuff like that, we can't always do that. So we apologize if we do end up having to call somebody out of order. Okay, let's talk about why we are here. We are here, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, because this defendant, George Wagner IV, a.k.a. George Wagner, and his brother, Edward Jake Wagner, Jacob Wagner, and his father, George Wagner III, also known as Billy Wagner. The 3 of them, in the late hours of April 21st of 2016 into the early morning hours of April 22nd of 2016, went up to Union Hill Road to 3 different locations that you all saw, and 1 location out on Left Fork Road, and murdered 8 people who did not deserve to die. I want that to sink in. They killed people who did nothing to justify the death sentence that they received at the hands of the defendant and his brother and his father. And in part, you will learn his mother, who helped in the planning and plotting of this. This was not a crime of passion. This was not in a fit of rage. This was not in self-defense. These murders happened after a period of 3 months of planning and plotting and purchasing and preparing and executing 8 individuals of a family. The question that has been asked the most over the past 6.5 years is why? Why did 4 individuals plot to kill 8 members of another family? And I think you will be disappointed to learn that there is no good reason. Now, I say that. There's rarely ever a good reason to kill somebody. But you, at some point in the middle of this trial, or certainly by the end of this trial, it will dawn on you that these murders should have never happened. It was the result of a series of misguided decisions by the defendant and his family. You will learn that some of the people they intended to kill, other people were killed simply because they were there. And you will learn that the defendants knew that before they walked out of the door that night to kill these individuals, that there might be other people there. And they all agreed those people would have to be killed too, regardless of the fact that they literally had no issue with any of those other individuals. They decided that those people would have to die too. And it could have been much worse. You will learn that little Chris, one of the victims in this case, 16-year-old Christopher Rhoden, often had friends spend the night. It was highly unusual that he didn't. Fortunately for his friends, he was grounded because he came home late the night before, and his parents took away his car, and he wasn't allowed to have his friend over. But if there had been a friend laying on the couch, as he would have been, you will learn without a doubt that they would have killed him too. Corey Holdren, who was the boyfriend of Hanna May Rhoden, also could very well have been there. And if he had been there, you will learn they absolutely would have killed him too. Again, people they had no issue with. They were willing to kill indiscriminately with no reason. I'd like to start by introducing you to the 8 people who were killed and telling you a little bit about them and why they were. Okay. These are the 8 individuals who were killed, like I said, late night, April 21st. Can you not see?
I just asked about taking notes. Will we be able to go straight up in statements?
I'm sorry.
The juror is asking if they can take notes during openings.
Yes. Yes, I'm sorry. I meant to ask Terry, would you get the jurors' notepads now?
Judge, can we approach just for a moment?
Yeah. You each have your notepads now, and thank you for reminding me of that. And you may certainly take notes during opening statements. Again, I just remind you that the opening statements of each attorney are not in and of themselves evidence, but are designed to help you understand the evidence as it's presented. You may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I've been asked not to stray too far from the microphone. Again, our court reporter has trouble hearing if we do, so I'm going to try to anchor myself here a little bit. Okay, so Christopher Rhoden Sr., and Gary Rhoden, Frankie Rhoden, Hazel Gilley, Dana Rhoden, Hanna May Rhoden, Chris Rhoden Jr., and Kenneth Rhoden. Chris Rhoden Sr. is 40 years old, was 40 years old at the time of his death. He lived at 4077 Union Hill Road, which was that very first address that we got out on the jury view, the very first one we went to. There was a shed there. There was a big, huge gray building. So hopefully you guys remember this from. But he was married to Dana Rhoden in 1994, and they divorced 13 years later. But for all practical purposes, they lived as husband and wife. They did not live together, but for instance, he purchased the trailer that she lived in at 3199 Union Hill Road about a month before the homicide. So he worked at Big Bear Lake every day. He operated heavy equipment and did construction, built decks and stuff like that, and alongside of Gary and Shannon Miller. People would describe Chris Sr. as a generous person. He would help family members. One of those examples is Bobby Joe Manley, whom you will hear from. She lived on his property for $150 a month, and in exchange, she would feed his animals every week, on every other day basis or frequently throughout the week. Another individual was buying a car from him that he never would have been able to afford, but again, Chris let him work that off by mowing the lawn or helping with feeding the animals, of which they had many. You see here that on April 21st of 2016, his last outgoing text was to Dana Rhoden, his former wife. And that was at 10:53 p.m. And you can see that his last outgoing contact was to Billy Wagner at 10:55 p.m. And that time will become very important to you when you learn its significance. Gary Rhoden was 38 years old at the time he was killed. He lived with Christopher Rhoden on occasion. He was from Kentucky, but he would come and stay with his cousin, and in so doing, he would work at Big Bear Lake and help make a living. So he worked alongside Christopher Rhoden Sr., and he was last seen at 8:30 p.m. by another individual there at both at his residence and down at 3122 Union Hill Road. Dana Rhoden was 37 years old at the time she was killed. She's the daughter of Leonard and Judy, and she is one of 4 siblings. James Manley is her brother, Bobby Joe is her sister, and Kathy Clay is another sister. She married Chris Rhoden. We already talked about this. They had 3 children together, Frankie Rhoden, Hanna May Rhoden, and Christopher Rhoden Jr., or Little Chris, as most people called him. She worked at Hillside Nursing and Rehabilitation Center. She pulled a double shift on April 21st of 2016. She started around 8 o'clock in the morning, and she worked until a little bit after 11 p.m. And she was last seen on video surveillance at the People's One Stop, and she was seen having a conversation with her friend and coworker, Angela Pease, around from 11:15 to 11:30 p.m. And the last outgoing contact was a series of text messages to her former husband that were unanswered. And she definitely relished in her role as grandmother. Even Angela Wagner would say that the grandchildren adored her. She would have cookouts and do other fun things for them when she had them. Frankie Rhoden was 20 years old. He had just started a new job doing construction. This was in keeping with what he had gone to vocational school for 3 years. His teacher there knew that Frankie considered him a mentor. He was in constant contact with him, even though he had already graduated. And the teacher knew that Frankie had just started this job, again, that was in keeping with the skills that he learned at school. He had 2 children, 2 sons. One was Clarence Brentley, is what he went by. He was 3 years old at the time his father was killed. And he also had a 6-month-old son named Ruger, who was actually laying in the bed with Frankie and Hannah Hazel when both of them were killed. He spent the day working with Cody Manley. He is seen by himself on surveillance camera purchasing groceries at Rhoden One Stop. His last outgoing contact was a phone call to Chelsea Robinson. Chelsea is the mother of Brentley. She had called him that evening and asked if he would be able to watch Brentley because the kids at the daycare were sick and she had to work. They had a very good relationship, and he consented to having Brentley come over, and that's why Brentley was there that night. The last activity we see on his phone is just before 11 p.m. He takes a picture of both of his children sleeping. He was dating Hanna Hazel Gilley, the mother of Ruger, and intended to marry her. They were living together at the time they were killed. Hanna Gilley was also 20 years old when she was killed. She is the daughter of Andrea Carter and Ray Gilley, engaged to Frankie Rhoden, had one son, who was her first child, 6-month-old. She was nursing him. She was not working at the time. She was simply providing care to their child. And she had been at that residence since the day before. And her last outgoing contact was to her sister at just before 1 a.m. Hanna May Rhoden, had just turned 19 a few weeks prior to her death. She resided at 3122 Union Hill Road. I guess I should back up. Frankie and Hazel lived at 4099, no, I'm doing that wrong, 4199 Union Hill Road. If you recall, we had you walk from one location to the other, and you kind of went through it was mowed grass, but then stuff on the side, and you were asked to kind of look around as you traveled that direction. Because Frankie and Hazel lived, it's approximately a half a mile from the front doorstep of Chris Sr. To that second place where there was only a porch left, but that's where Frankie and Hazel lived. Dana and Hanna May and little Chris lived together at 3122 Union Hill Road. And they had just moved there approximately a month prior to that, a little less than a month prior to that. So, and living there as well was Kylie Rhoden, which is the daughter that Hanna May had given birth to 5 days before she was killed. Her daughter, Sophia Wagner, who was almost 3 years old, not quite, she was 2.5 years old. I know it says 3 years old up there. But she also lived there when she was not with her father, Jake Wagner. So Jake Wagner was the father of Sophia Wagner. Her last outgoing contact was a text to Corey Holdren. Corey Holdren was supposed to spend the night that night with her, but his sister's water pipes burst, and so he had to leave to help his sister with that emergency. Otherwise, he also would have been there. And lastly, Chris Rhoden Jr. also lived there at that residence with his mother and his sister. Again, he had just been grounded because he had been out late. He was dating a girl at the time of the homicides. He was a freshman in high school. He had just got his driver's license a few months prior. And his last outgoing contact was a Snapchat just before midnight to Brandy Taylor. There he is getting his license. I'd like to go back. So you will learn that Chris Rhoden Sr. was one of the intended targets of the Wagners, and you will learn that's because he was the patriarch of the family, and they considered basically that if they kind of got rid of him, that the structure of the family would fall. And they also knew that if they only killed Hanna May, who was really their true target, right, that he would know who did it, and that would either get them arrested or he would retaliate and try to kill one of them. That's the reason he was killed. Gary Rhoden was killed simply because he was there. Now, they knew that he often stayed there and likely knew that he was going to be there that night, and again, were perfectly comfortable with killing him regardless. Frankie Rhoden knew that his sister had complained about the violence that Jake had exhibited upon her, and he found this out, Jake Wagner found that out when he was speaking with Dana Rhoden the week of the homicides, and Dana had shared that with him, and that, again, he would know that it was the Wagners that killed them. Hanna Hazel Gilley, again, she was collateral damage the Wagners were willing to take on to get to the other people that they wanted to kill. Dana Rhoden, again, her crime, she was allegedly not even one of the targets. She was allegedly collateral damage, but I think you will learn that she almost had to be a intended target, because you will learn that they waited for her to return to the residence after she got off of work. But again, she knew some of the things that Jake had said to Hanna May. She knew that he had said to her that if she left with Sophia, tried to leave with Sophia, that he would kill her and bury her body where her family couldn't find it. And so Dana confronted Jake Wagner with that information when he came to the residence the week of the homicides. Hanna May Rhoden, her crime was not returning the love of Jake Wagner, not submitting to the control of the Wagners. And you will learn that that is the character of this family, was very controlling of any women who came into their circle. So any women who dated, had children with George Wagner, any women who dated or had children with Jacob Wagner. And we have 3 prime examples of this. But for Hanna May's purpose, she was a little bit stronger than the others, and that is why she ended up being killed. Chris Rhoden Jr. Was an intended target, again, because he lived in the same residence, would know who did this, and that would cause an arrest or retaliation. Kenneth Rhoden was kind of an add-on. He was the one who lived out on Left Fork, where we drove down, and there was like construction down there on Left Fork. We drove past it at one point, and then we allowed you to stop and get out and walk up into that area. Kenneth Rhoden and Chris Rhoden Sr. were very close to each other. Kenneth Rhoden worked in Columbus, Ohio, at U.S. Utilities Company, and he had no running water at his residence, so he would get up at 4:30 in the morning and drive over to Chris Sr.'s and take a shower, and then go on to work. And there had been prior occasions where Chris Rhoden had been hurt, and Kenneth retaliated on his behalf. So the Wagners very much knew that about Kenneth, and so they decided that he had to be killed because, again, he would know who it was, and he also knew that the Wagners were going to be there that night, so he knew they had to kill him. Okay, so let's talk about how is it that 4 individuals plot and plan and conspire and prepare and execute 8 individuals. And you will learn that they were killed, most of them were killed while they were sleeping or in their beds, with the exception of Chris Sr. and Gary Rhoden, who were awake. It kind of starts with a love story, if you want to call that. A very young teenage girl, Hanna May Rhoden, age 13 at the time, was at the Pike County Fairgrounds. She participated in 4-H, and she had bunnies, and somebody introduced her to Jacob, who was almost 18 at that time, and she kept asking him to look at her bunnies or pet her bunnies. Jake will tell you that he was annoyed initially, but then on a second chance meeting, they started dating, if you can date at age 13. That was in August of 2010. Reportedly, Jake gets permission from Chris Rhoden Sr. to date his daughter, his very young daughter. Chris Rhoden agrees, but he always sends along a chaperone. Either Frankie or little Chris go with Hanna May whenever she's hanging out with Jake Wagner. And you will learn as well that Chris Rhoden Sr. also knew Billy Wagner. They were in fact friends. And so because of that, he gave his permission for her to be dating Jake. A few years later, Jake asked Chris Rhoden Sr.'s permission to propose to his daughter. Chris Rhoden permitted the proposal, but informed Jake that he would not permit his daughter to marry anybody until she was 18 years of age. So they had an engagement where they tattooed wedding rings on themselves. And then you will learn that Hanna May got pregnant when she was 15 years of age. And at that time, Jake was 20 years of age. It was during the pregnancy that we see the first signs of trouble. There are text messages from Jake to Hanna May, which state that she has to make a decision whether to be with him or not, whether to live with him or not, that Sophia, they had already named their child, was going to live with him no matter what. So if she wanted to be with Sophia, she would have to come and stay with him. And he says, quote, "I'll take Sophie, and if I have to, by force." This is when Sophia was still inside of Hanna May's womb. She gave birth to Sophia in November of 2013. She did stay with the Wagners periodically up on Bethel Hill Road. If you recall, we went up to Bethel Hill Road during the jury view. That was the hill that we literally went up. That was, I think, day 2 of our jury view. We went up the hill. Once you got up there, there was a trailer. That trailer was not there previously. That's now a hunting cabin. But we asked you to look first to the left of that trailer out in the distance, and there was some structure there. That was the home that they lived in at the time. As a side note, on the way down from Bethel Hill, we had you look off to the right. You stayed on the bus, and we had you look generally in a location. That was the location of the first residence of the Wagners, which you will learn burned down. Ultimately, the Wagners moved to Peterson Road, 260 Peterson Road. That was the location. It was a red house. It had a pool, a standing pool outside. It had 2 barns we had you go through. We had you look at a well. We had you look at a cistern inside one of the barns, if you recall that. That pool was not there when the Wagners lived there. That's something that the new owners have improved on the property. Likewise, there was, I think, a deck on the cabin right by the pool that they had put on. So there were some things that were different. But for the most part, structurally, it was the same. So Hanna May lived with Jake and George and Angela at 260 Peterson Road. You will learn that when they were on Bethel Hill, Billy lived with them. But once they moved to Peterson Road, it was only Jake and George and Angela Wagner. And Tabitha Wagner, who was George's spouse, they got married in 2012. And she lived there as well as Hanna May would stay there sometimes. Sometimes she would go home to her family. eventually, Hanna May leaves Jake in early 2015. She calls her father, asks for him to come get her. Jake had choked her, and she just could not handle the controlling nature of not just Jake, but also the family. You will learn that she found difficulty because Angela Wagner, or Jake wanted Angela Wagner to really parent Sophia Wagner. And she said it was awkward because they would want her, Sophia, to call Angela mom, even when Hanna May was sitting right there. So again, just this kind of controlling, there was fat shaming, trying to keep her from her family. And you will see that they also did these sorts of things to Tabitha Wagner and later to the wife of Jake Wagner. Once Hanna May left Jake, she started dating somebody named Charlie Gilley, who was the brother of Hannah Hazel Gilley. You will learn that she did not date him for long because he had a drug habit, and she was not tolerant of that, and so she stopped dating him. She started dating another individual named Corey Holdren. After she started dating Corey Holdren, she learned that she was pregnant, and she knew that the child belonged to Charlie Gilley, just based on the timing and everything. She let Corey Holdren know that, and you will hear from him that he elected to stay with her because they had a very loving and supportive relationship. In fact, he will tell you that he had an addiction to pills that Hanna May helped him get over. She insisted that he not use drugs if they were going to remain together, and she stayed with him during the period of time that he was withdrawing from those drugs. So at this point, Jake is continuously trying to get Hanna May to come back to him, threatening to keep Sophia from her, and goes to see an attorney for custody. And you will learn that Hanna May goes to that attorney, even though it's Jake's attorney, and she knows that, and meets with them. But you will learn from that attorney that Hanna May was not interested in signing any custody paperwork. She wanted things to just remain status quo. She would ask for changes, they would make it, but she still would refuse to sign the papers. And ultimately, when they learned that she was pregnant, they decided to put that to the side. And again, that was in late 2015. So at this point, I'm going to bring in Tabitha Wagner, which is George Wagner's former wife, because she plays an important role in this story. She was living with the Wagners at the same time that Hanna May was. And you will learn that they engaged in the same cycle with Tabitha. She was not allowed to have contact with her family. She will tell you she had over a year where she had no contact with her family. And that was because the Wagners did not think her family were good people. There had been some abuse in the past, and they didn't want her even associating with her family. She will tell you that she was allowed to call her mother one time on her birthday, but they would stand there while she was making that phone call. They would accuse her of poisoning them with food. The Wagners would accuse Tabitha of doing that. They would accuse her of being abusive of Bullvine, which was the child that she and George Wagner had. And again, were very critical of her, criticized her on how she parented, and heralded Angela as the role model to emulate. And again, Angela was basically parenting Bullvine instead of allowing Tabitha to do that. You will learn that on one occasion, George and Tabitha got into an argument over Bullvine, and Tabitha said that she was going to take Bullvine and leave with him. Angela took Bullvine from her and made the comment that she was going to go get her gun. Angela said that. Tabitha fled from the residence. You will learn that Angela threw a 2x4 at her as she was exiting the residence. And Tabitha hid on the property until it was dark. And then she took a bicycle and she bicycled down to the gas station, the nearest gas station, which was at least a mile away. Simultaneously, the Wagners go out looking for her. And when they see her arrive at the gas station, they are worried that she's going to call the police and say that they threatened her and they, threw a 2x4 at her, etc. She was just calling her mom for help. That's what she did. She called her mom. But the Wagners, anticipating that she might be calling for law enforcement, the comment was made that whoever calls first is the one who gets the charges. You better call first, George, and report domestic violence against her, so that counteracts that. So that's what they did. And since there was 3 of them against one of Tabitha, a complaint was filed against Tabitha, even though she had not done anything to them. Then you will find out that there was a custody hearing, there was a dissolution of their marriage and custody hearing on Bullvine, and she was not represented. Tabitha was unrepresented. George had an attorney, and she entered into one of the historically worst custody agreements anyone's ever seen. Specifically, she had no rights to him. George had full custody, and she was permitted to see him only when the Wagner said so, and only supervised when they said so. So no set schedule for her to see this child, and only if and when the Wagner said so. She will tell you that they convinced her that this was just a temporary thing, that until she was able to get her own place and be on her own 2 feet, that this was just a temporary thing. However, once she got on our own 2 feet, and tried to get increase in visitation, they did not permit it. So she had to get an attorney. Again, this was in 2015, which becomes a very important time period. I know I'm kind of bouncing around here, but this takes us back to Hanna May when she was talking to Tabitha's mother. Okay, Tabitha's mother is named Tess, Patricia, but she goes by Tess. She is having a private Facebook conversation. So, the messenger, and I don't know how many of you know Facebook, but, you can post stuff on your Facebook and everybody can read it, or you can instant message somebody, message them privately, and nobody else can see that conversation except you and the person you're conversing with, right? But they are talking about the Wagners and the custody issues that Jake and Hanna May are having, and Tess, Tabitha's mother, says to Hanna May, just make sure you don't let them make you sign papers like they did to Tabitha, right? To which Hanna May responds, I won't sign papers ever. They'll have to kill me first. Okay? Again, that's a private message between Hanna May and Tabitha's mother. That conversation happened on December 9th of 2015. She had left Jake early in 2015. That conversation happens December 9th of 2015, after they had already kind of exhausted the whole attorney thing. Just over 4 months later, Hanna May and 7 members of her family are dead. So let's go back to April 21st and April 22nd when these homicides occurred, and how we ended up here today in the courtroom with this defendant. You will learn that Bobby Jo Manley, I mentioned her earlier, she's the sister of Dana Rhoden. She was there coming to the property of Chris Rhoden Sr. to feed the animals. that he had. He had numerous dogs. They had chickens. They had pigs. They had inside dogs, outside dogs. So she was there to do this, and she typically would get her daughter on the bus at 7 a.m. and arrive at Chris Sr.'s house around 7:30 a.m. when she went. She didn't go every day. She sometimes went with an individual named Billy Morgan. Billy Morgan and Emma Morgan were a married couple that lived with Billy Joe Manley at that time, or Bobby Joe Manley, sorry. And sometimes Billy Morgan would go with Bobby Joe, and again, he would help her feed the animals, or he would mow the lawns and stuff. And they would keep track of their hours. There was a log inside Chris Sr.'s house where they would write down, Bobby Joe or Billy, and just that they were there. And then they got $20 a day to do these chores for Chris Sr. You will learn that typically Chris Sr. is not there when they arrive because he gets up early and he's already on his way to Big Bear Lake where he works. So he's typically not there when they get there. Additionally, there are 2 dogs that are inside dogs, and they can only be let out one at a time. Otherwise, they fight and or run away. So anytime they let one of those inside dogs out, it's just one at a time. Well, Bobby Joe will tell you that on this particular morning, she and Billy and Emma Morgan drove up to that location. Emma Morgan doesn't normally go with them, but they were going to go into town after the chores were done at Chris Sr.'s house, so she was just kind of tagging along for the ride. When they got there, you will learn that they immediately thought something was amiss because Chris Sr.'s truck was still at the house. And both of the inside dogs were sitting outside of the house on the front porch. Billy went to go start feeding the animals. Bobby Joe goes up to the house to see what's going on with Chris, why the dogs are out, all that stuff. The door is locked. That's also unusual. The door is not usually locked. She knows where the key is, though. She can't reach it. It's in a gutter above the front door. She calls Billy over to help her because he's taller, and they retrieve the key and they enter the residence. They obviously were not prepared for what they saw when they entered that residence. Furniture was askew. You'll hear there was vice grips on the floor that normally are in Chris Sr.'s pocket. And there was blood, lots and lots of blood. And drag marks leading from the living room through the kitchen and down the hall and back to the bedroom, where they surmised somebody who was bleeding had been drugged. They walk back to the bedroom, which is Chris Sr.'s bedroom, and there they find both Chris Sr. and Gary Rhoden laying on the floor. Bobby Joe could not tell what kind of injuries they had. She could not tell that they were shot. She thought that they had been beaten to death just because of so much blood, and they were partially covered with a comforter. She tried to rouse them by shouting at them. Billy was behind her. They quickly exited, and she went to the car where Emma Morgan, they call her Emmy, was still seated, and she retrieved her telephone and made a phone call to 911. And you will be able to hear that 911 call. She's out of breath. She's clearly frantic, clearly upset. Everyone who came into contact with her after that point will describe her as that. After she calls 911, she will tell you, it sticks vividly in her head, that she couldn't remember the address of Chris Sr., so she had to walk out to the mailbox to get the address for the dispatcher. She gets that address and gives it to the dispatcher, and in the meantime, she decides she's going to walk to Frankie's house to get his help and let him know what's happened to his father and to Gary. So she walks basically that same path that we walked on our jury view, and she gets to Frankie's house, and she's knocking on the door and yelling for Frankie, and she's not getting an answer. She hears Brentley, the 3-year-old, answer from behind the door. And she says, "Hey, B," is what she called him. "It's Aunt JoJo. Can you open the door?" He opens the door for her. There's a chain lock that she recalls having to help get open. And she enters the residence and asks Brentley where his father is. And Brentley points down the hallway and says, "Daddy has a lot of blood." She goes down to the bedroom, which is to the right when you enter the residence, and she finds both Frankie and Hannah Hazel laying in bed, clearly dead. Hannah Hazel apparently had been nursing Ruger at the time of her death because of the way the clothing was situated, and Ruger was still laying between them, covered in his parents' blood. Bobby Joe takes Ruger out of the bed. She says she couldn't help it. She didn't want him laying in their blood any longer. She gets both Ruger and Brentley, and she exits the residence. You will also learn that while she was walking to Frankie's house, Billy Morgan had gotten in the vehicle that they had arrived in and gone to get Dana Rhoden and Leonard and Judy Manley, who are the parents of Dana Rhoden and the parents of Bobby Joe Manley. Billy stopped at Dana's house, yelled for Dana, didn't get an answer, noticed the door was ajar, but decided to go on to Leonard and Judy's and get their help, get there and let them know what had happened to everybody. Leonard and Judy follow Billy Morgan back up to Frankie's house, and they also enter that residence, and along with James Manley. James Manley, again, is the brother of Dana Rhoden and the brother of Dana Rhoden and Bobby Joe Manley. He had not heard what had happened, but he saw Billy Morgan come to his parents' house and seemingly frantic, and his parents then rushing out afterwards and following Billy Morgan, and so he decided to get in his truck and follow and see what was wrong as well. When he saw what had happened to Frankie and Hazel, and Bobby Joe also told him then what had happened to Chris Sr. and Gary Rhoden, James decided to go down and tell his sister what has happened to her son and her former husband. When he gets there, he also notices that the door is ajar. He enters the residence. He knew that his sister had worked a double shift. They lived very close to one another. The Manleys, Leonard and Judy Manley, lived very close to where Dana Rhoden lived with Hanna May and Christopher. And he thought that maybe she was just sleeping, that she was, just really tired because she had worked a double shift and had worked late. He went back to her bedroom. She was covered up, so he didn't know if she was in the bed. He felt around in the bed until he could feel that her body was there, and he lifted the pillow that was covering her face and said that he could tell it was sticking to her face, and so he let it drop back down, knew that she was dead, and exited the residence. He will tell you that he heard Kylie, the 5-day-old baby, crying, but he could not bring himself to go back and see anything more. He went out, got into his truck, went and got his wife, April Manley, to tell her everything that he had seen and learned. And she came back with him to Dana's residence. And this was the residence, this was the last residence we visited on the first day. It had a red garage still standing. It kind of had, you could tell there was a cellar because this residence had an addition built onto it, and there was actually a cellar down there. It was right before we went on lunch break, the first day. April and James were there then at that residence, And in the meantime, law enforcement is finally responding, right? I should have mentioned that when Bobby Joe and them came out of the residence at Frankie's, the first deputy arrived on scene, Deputy Chandler. And several others followed him, and they were interested in getting anybody out of the scenes, roping off the scenes, protecting the scenes. Likewise, there were law enforcement coming up past Dana's up to Chris and Frankie's, as opposed to the first people to arrive came this way. They were going to Chris Sr.'s, but they had to pass by Frankie's, and that's when they saw all of these individuals collected outside of Frankie's residence. James Manley and April Manley flagged down the first law enforcement people that they saw passing the house. Those law enforcement, again, on their way to Chris Sr.'s house, not knowing that there was more individuals who had been killed at that location. And they told them what was going on, that they had gone in and they believed Dana Rhoden to be dead, that they heard the baby crying, but they had not checked on any of the other individuals, that there should at least be Hanna May and little Chris in that residence. Officers started to try to clear the residence because nobody at this time knows if there's an active threat present in any of these residences. So they're trying to clear it. Another deputy comes in and is focused on retrieving the baby, goes back to Hanna May's bedroom and gets Kylie and goes out of the residence with Kylie in his arms. Gives Kylie to an EMT, who then takes Kylie to an ambulance, and April Manley was permitted to be with Kylie while they were dealing with the scene. You will learn that the first room that they cleared when they were clearing the residence was little Chris's room. Again, that was off to the right, and you will see pictures of this, but when you enter the residence, his bedroom was off to the right. There was a living room that you're standing in when you enter the front door. There's a kitchen, and then there's Dana's bedroom, a hallway, and Hanna May's bedroom was back in the addition. So he was separated, by a living room and a kitchen from his mother and sister. They found little Chris in bed, shot and dead, and then they work their way back to Hanna May's bedroom and see that she also is shot and dead. And then they go to Dana's bedroom and confirm that she also has been shot and is dead. They clear the scene, and then you'll learn that, as with all these scenes, they rope it off and they prevent anybody else from going in until BCI can arrive and process the scene for evidence, right? So you will learn that then Sheriff Reeder showed up around 9:30. The phone call to 911 was just before 8 a.m. And you will learn that when he arrived, he kind of got a briefing of what was going on, kind of gathered facts and information, made sure the scenes were secure, asked EMT. There was a number of ambulances that had arrived by that time. He asked them to stage at a location that was between Chris Sr.'s house and Dana Rhoden's house. And he made a decision to call BCI to come and process the scenes, and then later to handle the investigation. BCI often helps process scenes for communities that don't have their own crime scene units, but especially in a case of this magnitude, Sheriff Reeder was going to do that. He also called the coroner and did his administrative stuff, right? Made sure that everybody was organized. He called other sheriff's deputies that ultimately came to help secure the scenes, do roadblocks so that people couldn't come in and out of the scenes, etc. The family of these people that were killed, of course, families calling family and everybody's being notified. They called Chelsea to come and get Brentley. She came and got Brentley. Kiley and Ruger were both transported to Adams County Regional Hospital just to be checked. And the family members of these individuals who were killed also started arriving on scene just to get some information or confirmation, or frankly to be told that this wasn't happening. The sheriffs made a decision to relocate all of the victims' family to a church on Union Hill Road. It's across 32 on the other side of Union Hill Road. And there they could, both the investigators could interact with the family and get any necessary information from them, and also the victims' families could receive information from law enforcement. You will also learn that during this time, family members had been calling Kenneth Rhoden, our last victim, out at Left Fork Road. But because he works in Columbus and they know his habit is to not really check his messages until lunch hour, he doesn't have his phone on his person. He goes out to his vehicle over lunch, and they expected that once the lunch hour came, he would check his messages and certainly return the many phone calls that he had received. However, he did not. And so some of the individuals that were at the church decided that they would go to Kenneth's house again to let him know what was happening. Where he's at Left Fork Road doesn't always have good cell phone service. Even he doesn't have good cell phone service out there. So they were hoping that that maybe was the explanation for why he was not receiving or returning phone calls. Donald Stone, Luke Rhoden, who is Kenneth's son, and Sean Watson, all three traveled out to that location. When they got there, again, called out for his dad. His dad didn't answer. Donald volunteered to go into the residence first, so Luke didn't have to. And they found Kenneth Rhoden also shot in bed where he had been laying sleeping. So they exited the residence and called 911, and local law enforcement responded to that. And again, same process of roping off the scenes and waiting for BCI to arrive. And BCI, we always assume people know our acronyms. That's the Bureau of Criminal Investigations. It's a part of the Attorney General's office. At the time, it was Mike DeWine. BCI arrived. You'll learn from Sheriff Evans that in his time there, again, he was interested in securing the residences. He also was responsible for getting the search warrants so that BCI could, in fact, search the residences of these 4 crime scenes. He would let you know that approximately 1:30 in the afternoon is when they finally got their search warrants typed, approved, and back out to the scenes and delivered to the BCI agents that were already there waiting for the search warrants so they could begin processing the scenes. So, and you'll also learn, I guess I should add this now too, that the coroners here don't do the autopsies, but they do respond when there's any unnatural death, just responsible for kind of a cursory review and in reaching a cursory cause of death. So the coroners that were responsible for this case was Dr. Kessler, who is the Pike County coroner, Dr. Farranet, who is a deputy coroner, and then an individual named Kenneth Dick from Adams County. He also helped. Again, kind of the call went out for as many people as possible to help on this. And there was actually a dispute as to whether this was Adams County or Pike County, and you will learn that the sheriff of Adams County and the sheriff of Pike County met and discussed, and the sheriff of Adams County was very certain that this was in Pike County. Apparently there are maps actually that show it both ways, so that's still kind of in dispute, but just as an aside. Okay, so again, you will hear from each of the crime scene individuals, the crime scene agents who processed the scene. There was usually one main one, and then usually another individual that would help that individual process the scene. They first start taking photographs of outside, and they work their way inside. They take pictures of everything as they find it before disturbing anything. And then they go back and start looking where there's evidence and putting down markers that mark that evidence, and collecting, blood swabs or ballistics or anything that they find. So let's talk about what we found at the crime scenes. At crime scene 1, where Chris Sr. and Gary Rhoden were, they recovered one .40 caliber shell casing, and they also, the following day, recovered a fully jacketed ammo from underneath the floor, and that was a heavier weight .30 caliber ammo. And you will hear from Matt White that he believed that to be probably a 7.69 .32 ammo, but he didn't know for sure because there wasn't enough of it left to tell that. That was from scene 1. Additionally, in scene 1, there were shoe prints that were collected. You will learn that, because there was so much blood at that scene, there were shoe prints that were left there, and those were collected. They literally just cut up that part of the floor and submitted it to the lab for processing, where you will hear from the BCI expert who processes that stuff, that she was able to get 2 very good shoe prints for comparison. What they do from that point is they try to ascertain what shoe this is, right? So there's databanks that BCI has, databanks that FBI has, but she was not able to find that in any of the databanks that were present. So she went out herself to various shoe stores and places that sell shoes, and trying to find something that matched that shoe print, the tread and design. And she was actually able to find that shoe at Walmart. It was a men's shoe, Velcro, and she was able to tell that it was either a 10.5 or an 11. You will later learn that she was only focused on one shoe print. When she actually looked at both, she discovered that there was a 10.5 and an 11 size shoe print in that residence. So a 10.5 and a size 11 of the same shoe, same type of shoe, just different sizes in the same shoe. So she was able to glean that from scene 1. And I should note, I didn't tell you this before, but after everything was secured at the scenes, the Bobby Joe Manley, Billy Morgan, Emmy Morgan, and James Manley, all individuals who first discovered the deceased individuals, were taken to the sheriff's office and interviewed. That's traditional. If you're the first person that discovers something, you're going to be interviewed. They also took their shoes, or in James Manley's case, took pictures of the shoes because he did not want to part with his boots. So we know that the shoe does not belong to any of those individuals. Okay, so that was the reason for doing that, is because they very quickly realized that there was this shoe print evidence. You will hear from Matt White that the .40 caliber shell casing that was left at Chris Sr.'s residence, he believed it to belong to a Glock, and he believed it to be a 3rd or 4th generation Glock. He also, there was a shell casing, .40 caliber, recovered from Kenneth Rhoden's address as well. Just he was only shot one time, and the shell casing was still there, and those two matched. And when I say they matched, I don't mean they're just the same type of ammo. I mean they were fired from the same gun, okay? They can tell by the impressions that are made when the bullet is fired through the gun. So they were able to tell that Chris Rhoden Sr., Gary Rhoden, and Kenneth Rhoden were all shot by the same .40 caliber Glock. As to Frankie and Hanna Hazel and Dana and Hanna May and little Chris, they found 22 shell casings, 22 caliber shell casings, rimfire shell casings at both Frankie's laying in the bed. Especially when they removed the body, they were able to find all these shell casings. There were 5 at Frankie and Hanna Hazel's, and there was only 1 single shell casing found at the residence where Dana and Hanna and little Chris lived, and that was underneath the crib in the room where Hanna May slept. But they were able to match those. Those also were, so we learned that Frankie and Hanna Hazel, Dana, Hanna May, and little Chris were all killed with the same weapon. Now, Matt White was less sure about what type of .22 weapon that was because he had never seen the markings. The markings were very unique. So he reached out to a lot of professional organizations trying to find out. Ultimately, Bowling Green's BCI lab ran across a gun that was a Colt 1911 .22 long rifle that made a very similar impression on the shell casing. So Matt White compared those, and he said, yes, this is the same type of weapon. So he became certain, not the identical weapon, not the weapon, but the same type of weapon, because he talked to people in Germany who confirmed for him that Colt made that weapon, and the firing pin made a very unique, that very unique marking on the shell casing. So he was convinced that we were looking for a 1911 .22 long rifle. So they also determined, based on the ammo and the injuries to Chris Rhoden Sr., he was shot. Again, he and Gary were the only two who were fully dressed and awake when this happened. You could tell that he had been standing in front of the doorway when he was first shot. He had wood embedded in his face and his head, and they could tell it was a high-powered rifle, like an AR or an SKS, and that would fit with the ammo that they found as well. So we're kind of just narrowing down what guns we're looking for and that sort of thing. Through ballistic evidence, Matt White is our firearms expert at BCI, and we now know that there were 3 weapons involved in the killing of these 8 individuals. The autopsies also confirmed those findings. The coroner will tell you, and the coroner is Dr. Lohman from Hamilton County Coroner's Office. She will tell you that the injuries she saw were consistent on the 5 that we believe were killed with a .22 of a smaller caliber weapon. She definitely felt that it had to be a high-powered rifle that Chris Sr. got shot in his arm because it tore through his muscle and caused fractures of his arm. And that the .40 caliber, the injuries were consistent with the .40 caliber being on Kenneth, Chris Sr., and Gary Rhoden. So basically, Chris Rhoden Sr. was shot with 2 different weapons, a high-powered rifle and a .40 Glock. They were also able to tell the angle by which, from where the high-powered rifle was shot, and they do that based on the angles of the holes and stuff, and again, you'll hear from the crime scene agents that were responsible for doing that. They could tell that it had been from outside of the residence, and that it was someone who was positioned down from where he was shot. And again, you'll get to see those angles. Another shoe print was found in scene 3 with the identical shoe that our shoe print expert had found at Walmart. It was the size 11. They were able to ascertain that, and you will hear a very detailed explanation of that. It's actually quite intriguing if you've never really thought about the bottom of your shoe before. But there's different stippling or impressions that they make on the bottom of the shoe so that no size is going to be the same, right? So the design on it, there's subtle differences, but you'll be able to see it with your own 2 eyes, that there's definite distinguishable differences. You will hear not only from Suzanne Elliott, who is the BCI expert in shoe print analysis, but also from an individual named William Bodziak, who is kind of considered the grandfather of shoe print evidence. He's been doing it for decades. He used to work for the FBI, has been referred to by the Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court, as one of the 2 world-renowned experts in the field of shoe print evidence. So it was important enough evidence that that stuff got sent to him to analyze as well. And he confirms everything that Suzanne Elliott determined, which is that there was a size 10.5 and a size 11 of this particular shoe inside scene 1, and a size 11 of the same shoe inside scene 3. Scene 3 being Dana Rhoden and Hanna May and Christopher Rhoden Sr. Sorry, we kind of number those just based on how they were discovered, right? Chris Sr.'s house was discovered first, Frankie's was second, Dana's was third, and then Kenneth's was fourth. So sometimes you'll hear individuals talking or witnesses talking about it in that way. The other thing that people deduced from the processing the scenes and looking at the evidence was that there was likely a silencer or suppressor used, especially when you're talking about with Frankie and Hanna and Dana and Hanna May and Chris Rhoden, little Chris, because they did not wake up. It did not appear that they woke up when the first individual was shot. So that would lead one to believe that probably a suppressor or silencer was used. So they kind of, again, this is just things that we're deducing based on the evidence and going forward in the investigation for. The other thing that the investigators felt strongly about was that whoever killed these individuals were very intimate with both the personal habits of the Rhodens and the residences themselves. The reason they said that, again, I told you that Dana Rhoden and Hanna May and little Chris had just moved into that residence less than 30 days prior. So you had to know them well enough to know that, right? This kind of gets rid of the drug cartel idea, and other individuals who just wouldn't know that, right? But they also knew of the surveillance cameras, et cetera, that were located at each of these places. Now, they weren't located at each of these places. Chris Sr.'s house had cameras, and Kenneth had cameras. Those were removed. So whoever killed these people knew that, right? So again, that's what the initial just processing of the crime scene indicated to investigators. In the meantime, of course, we're getting thousands of tips. Thousands is an exaggeration. We had more than 1,000 tips. Doing multiple, everybody's going in all directions. Immediately, there was information that the Rhodens had been in an argument with a group of individuals, and that group of individuals had threatened them on Facebook. And then one of those individuals actually took credit for it after the homicides and claimed that they had committed the homicides. That individual was found and interviewed, and that story quickly fizzled. So it was not those individuals. But, you know, the investigators considered everybody, right? We talked about, I guess, the building that you saw there, where we had you look up the stairs, that would have been right beside the residence, had a marijuana grow in it at Chris Sr.'s location. And there was a smaller version of that at Kenneth's. So, of course, the investigators ran down, and every lead, you know, related to anybody any of these individuals would have dealings with. We also did tower dumps. Tower dumps just tell you what phones are hitting off what towers at that time of the homicides. And, you know, you just kind of trap and preserve that information. Back to the shoe print stuff, we knew that that was a Walmart shoe. We knew what kind of Walmart shoe it was. And so we got video footage of all Walmart, anybody who purchased a size 10.5 or 11 in between the months of January 2016 and April 2016 in a 50-mile radius of the crime scene. So lots of Walmarts that we got video footage from, but anybody who purchased that, because we knew that those shoes belonged to the people who killed these individuals. Another thing that we could tell about the shoes was that they were new. Immediately upon examination of the prints that were left at the scene, our expert was able to tell us that that was either never worn or nearly never worn. So we were looking, that's why we only asked for that kind of time frame, right? So a lot was, we were able to learn just from the physical evidence, at least as far as what we were looking for. So what finally turned our attention to the Wagners? When Jake Wagner was initially interviewed, pretty early in the investigation, he indicated that everything was just dandy between he and Hanna May. And it wasn't until we got back those Facebook records and some of the text messaging that we found that that was not the case, right? So we're seeing these messages where she's saying that. So that contradicted what he was saying. She was confronting him about being violent. We also saw that, you know, the message between Tabitha's mom. Additionally, Billy Wagner was interviewed, and he indicated that we were asking everybody for their phones just to, you know, because they had interactions with the victims. We wanted to get their phones just to kind of see if we could piece anything together. And he indicated that he did not have the phone that he had at the time of the homicides because he kept trying to call Chris Sr. because Chris Sr. was his best friend, and after the homicides, he kept trying to call him, and he finally got frustrated and upset one day and broke his phone. Well, that was a good story, but it wasn't true because we have phone records that indicate he never once tried to call Chris Sr. And in fact, we had the phone calls to Billy Wagner at that 10:55 p.m. that was never returned by Billy Wagner. So that didn't add up. Additionally, there was a story that Billy Wagner put out, what we would call a false exculpatory story, which was that Billy and Chris were supposed to do some big drug deal out in California for upwards of $800,000, and that Skid Montgomery, who, you know, supposedly would want in on that, found out, and Skid Montgomery's the one who killed Chris Rhoden, and that Billy was probably next. That didn't make any sense either, because obviously Billy was not dead, and nor was he hiding at that time. So again, just kind of little things like that was enough for us to look a little bit harder at the Wagners. And the real question was, we knew that Hanna had told Tabitha's mom that she would not sign papers ever, that they would have to kill her first. But did the Wagners know that? And if they did know that, was that enough motive for them to kill the Rhodens? And the answer to both questions, unfortunately, is yes. They did know about the message, and yes, that was sufficient motive for them to kill Hanna May and her family. After we started focusing on the Wagners, we knew we needed to do some search warrants. Jake Wagner had been playing kind of dodge the ball with Special Agent Scheiderer as far as turning over his phone as well. He still had a phone, but he was not turning it over to us. So we decided we needed to get a search warrant for that phone to collect it from Jake Wagner. So upon serving that search warrant to Jake Wagner and getting his phone, this was right before they went to Alaska. They went to Alaska in May of 2017, and he obviously had been turning the heat up on them, and they could tell that. I just indicated that Special Agent Scheiderer had been trying to get the phone from Jake and had been unable to do so. While he was there serving the search warrant for the phone upon Jake at 260 Peterson Road, Special Agent Scheiderer noticed shell casings, lots and lots of shell casings in the driveway. Now, again, 260 Peterson Road, when you walk up to the old barn, and then when you're kind of parallel to it, that's where he saw a lot of the shell casings. And we decided to get a search warrant for those, to collect those, in the event that any of them were the same or similar to what had been used at the crime scene. So we went out and executed that search warrant on the day that the Wagners actually left to go to Alaska, and found a shell casing that Matt White said was a match to the .22 caliber shell casings that were recovered from the crime scenes at Frankie's house and at Dana's house, as in fired from the same weapon, not just similar, but the actual gun that killed Dana and Hannah and little Chris and Frankie and Hannah Hazel had also been fired out at 260 Peterson Road. We returned the following day with more agents and the STAR team, and combed the area looking for any other shell casings. These shell casings were clearly weathered. They weren't recent. And we ended up with, I believe, 12 shell casings that were compared. There were many more, but there were 12 that were compared by Matt White to the 5 shell casings that we had from, or 6, sorry, from the crime scenes, and they were direct matches. So now we knew that one of the Wagners, or someone that had shot the weapon out at the Wagners, had also shot and killed at least 5 of our victims. The conclusions that Matt White made was these comparisons revealed matching individual firing pin impression characteristics, confirming the 18 fired .22 rimfire cartridge cases were fired in the same firearm. But something else happened that day as well. We were approached by a neighbor, and the neighbor told us that the Wagners had put all their belongings in some trailers, and they had parked the trailers up off of State Route 41, which we went to as well. That was the place where we kind of drove down a side road, and we had to look through a yard. It was the very last thing we did, I think, on the second day of jury view. And you looked back towards a white big house and just vast property, basically. So having learned that, we first confirmed that there were, in fact, trailers up there. And then we went and got a search warrant in order to search those trailers. And you will see pictures of this. It is truly a needle in a haystack. But there were several trailers, and in searching, literally took everything off of the trailers and searched through them. There was a tub of important things, it was labeled that, and inside that tub was a receipt dated April 7th, I believe. Yes, April 7th of 2016 for 2 pairs of athletic shoes from Walmart. So just 2 weeks prior to the homicides, we have a receipt in the Wagner's property of someone purchasing shoes. We don't know yet if they're the shoes, right? But we definitely are going to check this out. We do that. We send an agent to Walmart with the receipt so that he can get the, find out from Walmart what shoe this is based on the SKU numbers or whatever. And simultaneously, we send a CIU individual to our command post, which was out of the A plant, to pull up the video footage, that bank of video footage that we had, if you recall, that we collected from Walmart but didn't have a use for yet. And we were able to pull up the video from Waverly Walmart on that same date at the same time with that receipt. And Angela Wagner was in Walmart purchasing a 10.5 and an 11 size in the identical shoe that was left at the crime scene. Meantime, our special agent was able to confirm with Walmart that it was in fact a 10.5 and an 11 of that shoe. So that was a very important find. The other thing that we found was a typed up list of demands for Hanna May regarding Sophia, about who was allowed to watch her, who wasn't allowed to watch her, how she would be schooled, she would be homeschooled, all these other things that she had to abide by, that was typed up by Jake Wagner. Another discovery at the time were custody documents. And by custody documents, I mean documents that one would fill out so that if anything happened to you, your children would go to somebody, right? So there were documents that purported to be signed by Hanna May that said, if I die, I want my child to go to Jake Wagner. I want my child, Sophia Wagner, to go to Jake Wagner, the person that I, have such issues with. That piece of paper was dated as if Hanna May had signed it on December 24th of 2014, Christmas Eve, 2014, which was really the last holiday that she spent with the Wagners, right? Because she left in early 2015. And the problem with that, first of all, was that our handwriting people looked at it and said that Hanna May likely did not sign that thing. We had a very recent signature of hers when she applied for a driver's license and compared it to the signature that was on there. But more importantly, let me see if I can fly through this and get you to it. Sorry. More importantly, you're right, if your eyes can see this, then good for you. It was printed off the computer on April 3rd of 2016. That piece of paper didn't even exist until April 3rd of 2016, so it could not have been filled out in December of 2014. You will also learn that, well, I won't get ahead of myself, but so we knew that that had been backdated, right? We knew that she could not have signed that in 2014 because the paper didn't even exist until 2016. And again, April 3rd of 2016, just a little over 2 weeks before the homicides, they're printing this out so that if Hanna May would unexpectedly meet the end, Sophia would go to Jake. But there were 2 other documents that we found on that day, which are extremely telling. There were 2 documents, one that Jake filled out and one that George filled out. And they were dated, I believe, in 2015, March of 2015, instead of December of 2014. But they said for Jake's, if he dies, Sophia goes to Angela Wagner, not Hanna May. Almost like they knew Hanna May wasn't going to be alive. That's one. George Wagner also fills out a custody document that if something happens to him on the night of the murders, Bullvine, his child, will go to his mother. So they were anticipating whether they got arrested, caught in the middle of the act, or something worse. They wanted to make sure that custody of their children was secure. On April 3rd of 2016, all 3 of those documents were printed out and filled out and signed. And you will learn that as well from further evidence. We also found other things like a brass catcher and a bug detector and other items that were of obvious interest. That led us to wanting to have conversations with the Wagners and confronting them with this information, right? So we went to the border in Montana because they had traveled to Alaska. They drove to Alaska, and they drove through Canada. They actually left through North Dakota, but when they came back through Sweetgrass, Montana. And so we went up there and confronted them, and most telling of the things that we confronted you could tell they had a canned response for a lot of things. They knew that we had used metal detectors out at their house. So they had a response for that. Canned response, all said the same thing. But when confronted with the shoes, clearly not expecting that confrontation, Angela admitted to buying those shoes for her boys. However, she said that they hated the shoes because they were old grandpa shoes. Quite honestly, they are. And she threw them away the same day because she didn't like them. Never mind, she had the receipt. Now, I will say they were only like $13.97 per pair. But if you had taxes in 2 pair, that's $30. Could have easily gotten back if you just returned it. But she says those shoes couldn't have been used in the murders because she threw them away the same day she bought them for her boys because they hated them. And the video footage also showed that there were other individuals in that vehicle when she bought those shoes. And you will learn later that it was, in fact, Jake and George and the 2 children, young children as well. While the Wagners were at the border, we also installed a listening device in the vehicle that they were driving. So we touched on this in voir dire about citizens' right to privacy, certainly. But at this point, we had an overwhelming amount of evidence that was pointing us to the direction to believe that the Wagner family, Jake, George, Angela, and Billy, were involved in the murder of 8 individuals. We had to coordinate that with other states, and were able to do that. The most interesting thing about that device that was installed in the vehicle, so imagine, if you will, 4 individuals being surprised at a Montana border, agents putting them in separate rooms, and BCI walking in and questioning them. Ohio BCI people walking in and questioning them. First, Billy and Angela get back in the vehicle. First, Billy gets in the vehicle. He's released first, and then Angela gets in the vehicle. Not a word. Not a word about, oh my gosh, can you believe that happened? What they think we did this? No conversation like that at all. No conversation at all about what just happened. And then George comes out, and then Jake comes out, and then they're released and free to go. We find out later that there's a reason for that, because Billy had told them that, be quiet. There's a listening device. Other records are coming back as well. At the Montana border, we seized a laptop. It was in the possession of Angela Wagner, but we found that it was used by all of the Wagners. We had financial records that came back. We had phone records that came back, phone records from Jake's phone that we had got the search warrant for. Financial records revealed purchases of parts to make a homemade silencer. Sorry, completely out of order here. And going backwards. So, from February to March of 2016, you show purchases of 2 flashlights, drill bits, tap and die, freeze plugs that act as baffles. So this is just a open source video that shows you how to make a silencer out of a mag light. Mag lights have serial numbers. It's actually a way to make it if you can apply to ATF to make it. And that's why they have the serial number on the mag lights, is because for legitimate purposes. You see there in the upper right-hand corner is The Walking Dead. Use mag light silencers because if you kill a zombie and they hear, then the other zombies come. So, and you will learn that Jake was an avid Walking Dead watcher. So we show purchases of items to make a homemade silencer for both a .22 caliber weapon. You can tell based on the size of the drill bits and the tap and die, and a .40 or .30 caliber weapon. So, and again, you will hear from ATF about this. They will give you information about how you make a homemade silencer. We show 2 masks purchased by George on April 9th of 2016. We show Jake, at least his awards card being used to buy 7.62 ammo and a magazine for an SKS, also in April. There was a phone jammer purchased by Angela. A phone jammer jams signals for phones. So say you're going to go murder 8 people and you don't want them to be able to call for help, then you have a phone jammer on your person and it jams the signals. It's actually illegal because it can interfere with aircraft and such. So, but that was purchased, and a bug detector was purchased by Angela. There were the financial records also just confirm what we already knew, which was this is a very, they function as one unit in pretty much everything they do. Financially is no exception. The house in Peterson Road was in both Jake and George's name. Angela lived there with them. They interchangeably used each other's credit cards and account, PayPal accounts or Amazon accounts or whatever. And we showed George buying fuel filters from OK Auto Parts on April 18th of 2016, and that will come into play later. Phone records revealed a list of guns that Jake had made, and the gun list includes an SKS belonging to George, Wagner, it was a list of all the guns that the Wagners owned and who owned them, or who they belonged to, right? There was a little cricket that belonged to Sophia. There was an SKS that belonged to George, and there was a 1911 22 that belonged to Jake. So, this was just a list that he had made in 2015 of phones that they, just kind of a inventory of the phones that they did. We also learned that both Jake and George dyed their hair the week of the homicides, dyed it very dark. Now, again, this is kind of an oddity, but Jake Wagner fancied himself a Norman Reedus lookalike. Norman Reedus is the actor who plays Daryl on The Walking Dead. He also plays in another movie called Boondock Saints. You will hear more information about this in the course of the trial. So again, please follow the court's order and don't go home and watch it. Only consider what you hear here. But Boondock Saints is the story of two brothers who are vigilante killers, kill people we need killed, right? And they're justified, and they say scripture over the last guy right before they kill him. And their dad, in Boondock Saints 2, the dad also joins in. The two brothers, one of the brothers is played by Norman Reedus, okay? So this becomes important when, again, we're examining Jake's phone, and we find that at 7:06 p.m. on the night of the homicides, he Googles and watches a scene from Boondock Saints 2. It's called the Ding Dong Motherfucker scene, okay? It's not even one of the brothers in the scene, but he's got 1911 22s with silencers on them, and utter some profanities, like they're arriving to kill these people, right? They watched that at 7 o'clock the night before they left to go kill these 8 people. That's important because for whatever reason, they take a lot of their cues from the homemade silencer from The Walking Dead and dyed their hair to look like the brothers in Boondock Saints. And, of course, presumably to throw off any forensic evidence that might be gathered if they were to leave behind a hair. We also seized a laptop. I told you that. When we were able to finally look at that laptop, we found the answer to our question of, we knew that Hanna May had said, they will have to kill me first. But did the Wagners know that? And the laptop demonstrated that yes, in fact they did. Because Tabitha Wagner in 2015, around about April of 2015, had started pushing for visitation of her son. And when she wasn't getting it, she consulted with an attorney, and she was following the attorney's instructions and trying to get like Wednesdays and every other weekend to start with. The Wagners weren't having that. And so Angela Wagner was hacking into the Facebook accounts of Tabitha and Tabitha's mother. And you will learn that at some point they had insisted on getting that password from Tabitha. And apparently she had not changed it, or they remained logged in, or whatever enabled them to continue doing that. But the purpose for that hacking was to get dirt or information on Tabitha to use against her during any custody proceedings, if in fact she did initiate custody proceedings, right? So during this process of Angela hacking into this Facebook to gather stuff for George, in the event that Tabitha initiates this custody thing, they see this message between Hanna May and Tabitha's mom that was meant to be private, obviously, but they say that. The screenshot, so there's a screenshot of this, right? So that's how we knew that they were seeing it, because she would take screenshots because she was going to use that in court, right? The screenshot was practically real time. It was taken almost immediately after the messages occurred. So there was some active monitoring of that going on. And I have to say, note, probably the most important word in that is she says, I won't sign papers ever. They will have to kill me first. Not Jake will have to kill me first. They will have to kill me first. Because she knew how the Wagners operated. She talked about the fact of how they did Tabitha that night and how they were trying to lure her back into the house. And they had a gun on the coffee table. So she very much understood how the Wagners operated as a group. The last thing that we got from, probably not the last thing, but another significant thing that we got from Jake, the backup of Jake's phone on that laptop, was a picture of him holding a 1911. Let's see if I can get us there. Nope, went the wrong way again. So you see in the upper left-hand corner, there's a picture of the 1911 on carpet, which was consistent with the carpet inside of 260 Peterson. And then there's a later photo of him holding the weapon. You can see the tattoo. And down there's just a close-up of the tattoo around his finger. You can see it in that first picture, close out. Additionally, they were able to take prints from the photo and compare it to known prints of Jake Wagner and confirm that it was, in fact, his hand. Now, it was taken by his phone, so we assumed that anyhow, especially with all the other indications. But at that point, we believed we had the murder weapon, or at least one of the murder weapons, in Jake's hand. Another thing, another investigative tool that we did was monitoring their phones, their phone conversations, both in 2017 and in 2018, both summers. 2017 being when they first went to Alaska, 2018 being when they came back from Alaska. We also installed listening devices in the truck that Jake and George drove together. They worked for R&L, and they did tandem driving. So while one was sleeping, the other was driving, or at least that was the theory. That's not really how it works, because they often were awake at the same time. Also, I forgot to mention that we had done a search warrant on the Flying W shortly after we did a search warrant on Peterson Road and then the 41 that led us to State Route 41. There we found 2 bulletproof vests in possession of Billy Wagner, and numerous weapons, I want to say 14, but numerous weapons that were not in Billy's room. He had asked Robin to keep them in her room in the event of something like a search warrant. She did acknowledge to us that they were his weapons. But what we noticed most in the 2017 time that we were monitoring their conversations was that they were constantly reminding each other not to talk on the phones and not to say anything because they're probably listening to us, or wait until you get home so we can talk about it. So it was clear that they were trying to thwart any efforts of listening to them. One of the most significant things that we heard in 2017, however, was when we brought ground penetrating radar machines in there to try to look for any buried weapons or cell phones or anything, because I neglected to mention that they took a lot of the victims' cell phones when they committed these homicides. Not Frankie and not Hazel, but everybody else, they took their phones. And while we were out there and we were listening to their conversations, Jake was having conversations with the new homeowner because they had sold the property at 260 Peterson Road, and the new homeowner, who was still the current owner, that was his first day of possession when we came out there. And so Jake was talking to him saying, basically you can kick them off if you want to. And, but Angela was asking Jake, which barn, because they could tell we were searching it, for metal. And she kept saying, which barn though, Jake, which barn? And it was very important to her, you could tell, to just, to learn which barn we were searching. So that was one conversation that was very telling and made us also wonder what was so important about a barn. In 2018, I think we had much more success listening to the conversations, and you will get to hear some of these conversations or hear the content of these conversations. But I think that is because we had kind of laid low for the year that they were in Alaska, and they didn't realize we were still doing stuff, because we hadn't been interacting with them. And so when we first kind of tuned in, we got a more organic conversations. But it was right back to kind of the same MO, which was George and Angela were scolding Jake because Jake had married a girl in Alaska, Beth Ann. He married her, and then she traveled with them back to Ohio. They had stopped briefly to try to get a home in Missouri, but the loan people weren't going to approve that. So they came back to Ohio and moved into the residence of Angela's father, who had passed while they were in Alaska. And so she inherited that home, so it was, free room and board. So, but Beth Ann had come back with them, and George and Angela were very upset with Jake because Jake had told Sophia that she could call Beth Ann mom. And the reason that upset them was because both Bullvine and Sophia considered Angela to be their mom, and that this was going to cause great confusion to Bullvine because he thinks Sophia is his sister and that Angela is their mom and all this stuff. And so, Jake was accused of being selfish and inconsiderate, etc. Beth Ann also gives us a very good social security number and everything else before they consummated the marriage. They installed a tracking device on her phone. Angela Wagner hired a private investigator to learn more about her. Jake tells her, don't have your family come around here. Don't even tell them where you live, because if they show up, I'd hate to have to kill somebody else. Or somebody, sorry, they did not say somebody else. But again, just kind of that, isolate the women, control them, monitor them, and then these accusations and threats. Simultaneously, we were presenting information to a grand jury. We had Rita Newcomb, which is Angela Wagner's mother, come down and give us a handwriting sample along with Angela Wagner, because on the custody documents, you will see that Rita Newcomb was the notary republic, or the presumed notary public. Found out later that that was not the case, that Angela had also forged her mother's name as the notary. But at that time, we did not yet know that. And we also got shoe sizes and impressions of Jake and Billy and George Wagner. How are we on time? Ooh. Okay, yeah. We're going to break for you right now, I think, if that's okay.
Council, approach here just a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, we're, due to the hour right now, it would be time to take a break, maybe a little past time. However, if we just take our 15-minute break, then it's going to be pretty choppy between now and a lunch, or you're going to have to eat lunch at 4 o'clock. So we're going to take a lunch break now until 1 o'clock. You're all on your own for lunch, but you do need to time yourselves to be back here. I would say about 5 minutes early. Be down at the jury room on the first floor. You'll be brought up from there by some court personnel. You're going to hear me give you this admonition several times during the course of this trial. However, even if I neglect to do it, this admonition applies at each break. It applies each break, each recess, each day off, and when you're away from the courthouse in the evening between days of trial. The admonition is you are not to discuss this case with anyone. You're not to permit this case to be discussed with you or in your presence. You're not to form or express an opinion concerning this case until it's finally submitted to you for deliberation and verdict. You're not to do any research at all concerning this case, either as to the facts or as to the law. You're not to view, listen to, or read any reports or accounts of this case from any source whatsoever, which would include but not be limited to the internet, Facebook, any social media sites, radio, television, or newspapers. You're not to have any contact with participants in the trial, and that would include, without limitation, of course, the attorneys, parties, or witnesses. And again, you'll be hearing that quite a bit during this trial, but even if I neglect to do it, it applies throughout the trial. Does counsel for either side have anything else that you wish to say at this point before we?
No, thank you.
All right. Then we are in lunch recess until 1 o'clock. Thank you. Please be seated. Does counsel, please be seated. Does counsel have anything before we bring the jurors in, anything that we need to go over? All right, so let's bring the jury up. I'm sorry, was there something?
I don't think we have anything, thank you.
All right, okay. Let's bring the jurors up then. jury can be seated. Please be seated. Counsel for the state may continue your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon now. And again, I apologize. The length of the opening is pretty reflective of the length of the potential trial, right? So, and the amount of evidence that we have collected over the period of the last years. Okay, so this is I just wanted to show you where the search warrant locations were. I mentioned to you that we did the Peterson Road, the 6851 Camp Creek is the Flying W, and then the State Route 41. So this is just to kind of give you an idea, juxtapositioned by the crime scenes there. The ones in red are the crime scenes, and the ones in blue are where the search warrants were conducted. Another thing I want to correct that I was wrong about, that I misstated, I didn't mean to, but it was a .40 caliber bullet that they pulled out of the floor at scene 1. So that is, I indicated to you that Christopher was shot with a .40 caliber and a high-powered rifle, and the 7.62 .39 projectiles were found there at that scene as well. Steel jacketed, so indicating a heavier weight ammunition. So, okay, I just wanted to clear that up. Another thing that I should have mentioned, when we did the search warrant at 260 Peterson Road, we found a burnt-up DVR camera surveillance system that they had purchased in 2016, on March 17th in 2016. They also purchased a 3-year warranty plan with it, but in May of 2017, when we conducted our search warrant, it was found burnt up in a burn pit. So we found that to be noteworthy as well. This is site cell records. I talked about doing the tower dumps. This is actually from tower records. What this indicates to us is that the things you see here are the cell phone towers that your phone bounces off of, which kind of gives you a geolocation of your where your phone is located. And that was analyzed, and the night of the homicides on April 21st of 2016 was the first night the entire year of 2016 that Billy went to sleep at, or his phone was there at night and first thing in the morning. So again, just indicating that he was there that night, whereas normally he was staying with Frederica and his father during that time. So this also is, I think I told you, I thought maybe 14 guns. I haven't counted that up again. It's more than 14. But noteworthy is all the search warrants that we did and all the guns that we recovered, we never, ever recovered the 1911 .22 or an SKS, consistent with the list that Jake had on his phone. We found the other weapons, but not those two items. So, so that was noteworthy as well. The next thing I want to talk to you about is the silent. Oh, no, another correction. It's Walther using Colt's name for the 1911 .22, if that matters to anybody. But when they called and talked to Germany, they spoke to Walther. So just some of you may have already known that, but I wanted to make sure I was being accurate when I was stating things. Okay. So you will recall that I talked about in 2017 when we were listening to the conversations that Angela Wagner seemed to be very interested in which barn we were searching. So taking that information, right around the time of grand jury, we wanted to go look at the barn again. And there was a new build barn, which was the one that, when you guys first got on that property at 260 Peterson, it would, you walked up around the hill and into that barn. That was the new build barn. That was something Jake and George built. And we surmised that that might be the barn that they maybe poured fresh concrete into and, buried some of the weapons or something, but we didn't know. So we went up to the property, we looked at that. It seemed highly unlikely because the concrete that they used was not very solid and, would not provide much cover. And so we ventured into the old barn, which was that barn, on the right, where we pointed out the cistern that now has plants growing in it or something. It seems to be filled in. The question was whether that had ever been searched, and it had not, because there were apparently 2 possums floating in it during the first time they were out there. But this is how it appeared when we did the search of it in 2018. So this was October of 2018. And again, a new homeowner had the property by this time. And these are just some of the items that were recovered from the cistern. And there is an item there of interest. It's right there in the middle. That is going to be a homemade silencer that was burnt up and disposed of in that cistern. There was lots of bricks in that cistern as well. Franklin County dive team came in and removed every single brick, every single object, every single possum bone. And you can see that kind of black, gunky stuff. It looks much different now when we went on our jury view, but I just wanted you to see kind of the difference there. The Franklin County dive team went under that water to recover these items. So, and there's the item in question. And that was submitted to ATF. They did an x-ray of it. They found the freeze plugs down the middle of it. They saw it had been used and it apparently was not aligned correctly, so it caused damage, so it was not functional after they tried to use it once. But the very last line, it is therefore my opinion that the presence of silencer components in conjunction with a bullet strike visible on a metal baffle, thus indicating the use on a firearm that these components would only be utilized for a firearm silencer. So that was an ATF report that we got back. Okay. The other thing that I have not talked about, but we did have you look at in your during the jury view, was you remember we got out at an intersection near 772, and we had you look at cameras located on a home, and then later we had you look at, there was another one that went around the front. So you can see that it's like around the corner. So that becomes important. The purple things that you see on there, so the red being the crime scene, the purple is where the cameras were located. And those cameras do pick up vehicles traveling, at one point 1 vehicle, and then later 2 vehicles following each other very closely. And, we'll give you all the times on that, but those become important as well. Okay, so that, one other thing about the silencer, because it has a serial number on it, we were able to get information from Maglite that said that Maglite was made in January of 2016. So, eliminated any prior owners, that would have handled that. Okay, so that brings that information. Once the silencer was pulled out of the well on the property that used to belong to the Wagners, that brings us to where we are here today. And after indictment, I guess I should say, the 4 individuals were indicted along with Frederica Wagner and Rita Newcomb. And Rita Newcomb, I told you, was Angela Wagner's mother. Frederica Wagner is Billy Wagner's mother. I'm not going to remember the time period. I didn't write that down. But Rita came forward and told us she was charged with forgery for backdating that document because she was not acknowledging that she did not sign it, right? But she came forward and did acknowledge to us that she did not sign that. She did not notarize that Angela Wagner had in fact notarized those documents using her name, didn't tell her about it when she did it, and that she had asked Rita Newcomb to lie for her and say that she, in fact, had been the one that notarized this and that Hanna was present and all this other stuff, right? But Rita said that, she intends to meet her maker one day and she didn't want to have this on her conscience. So she came clean with us and we reduced her felony to a misdemeanor. She has not been sentenced yet. But what she told us was consistent, obviously, with what our handwriting expert had already concluded. And then, in April of 2021, Jake Wagner came forward as well. He will be here to testify for you, and he will tell you, I guess I should back up before I go into what he told us. A proffer means you're giving us a statement and telling us what happened, and in exchange, we give you something in return. The state gives you something. What we agreed to give him was to dismiss the death penalty against him, right? You will learn that he pled to all of the counts in the indictment, all of the specifications, and he received he will receive under that agreement, 8 life without parole sentences consecutive to one another, which just means they're served one after another, which is fiction, legal fiction at that point. But in addition to hundreds of years with 78 years being mandatory firearm specifications that he has to serve before he even ever gets to his life without parole. I think at one point the judge said to him, "Do you understand that you will die in prison?" And he said yes. So he understands that. The second part of the agreement, he wanted us to also dismiss the specification against his family, each of his family members. He wanted them to escape the death penalty. And we told him we would not do that unless he agreed to testify in their trials. So if any one of them went to trial, okay? So just so you know what the deal was. He actually, kind of unlike a lot of defendants, seemed to be doing this to benefit his family, at least as much as himself, if not more. So that said, we sat down with him and he told us what had happened. And I will say that we were right about the majority of it. The majority of it being that, he dated Hanna, he fell in love with her, he was very upset when they parted ways. He wanted her very much to come back to him. He, was certainly jealous. But also that the idea to kill these people did not initiate with him. He was definitely a willing participant. He will tell you that his dad was the first to broach the subject with him. And under the idea that Hanna May was dating people that they didn't approve of, and that she was letting Sophia be around people that were not good people. And they knew that Hanna, or they believed that Hanna, had been sexually abused by one of a friend of the family, kind of peer age friend of the family, and nobody did anything about that, so they, this concern was laid out as well, that, if anything would happen, nobody would protect Sophia over there. And the idea was that they had to kill Hanna. And Jake said, "No, I'm not going to do that." when his dad first brought the idea to him. However, on another occasion, Jake will tell you that he thought about it, and although he did not believe anything had happened to Sophia at the time of the homicides, he indicated to us that why would you wait for something to happen? Because you can't undo that. So based on that, and encouraged by his father and encouraged by his mother, they set out on a plan to kill Hanna May. At first, it was just going to be Hanna May. There was an idea to kill Hanna May and kill Corey Holdren and make it look like Corey killed Hanna May and then killed himself. Billy didn't think that would fly or work out. I believe Angela Wagner at one point suggested that they just rat Chris Sr. out because they knew he had marijuana, and that maybe if he went to prison that would upset things enough, and Billy said he wouldn't do that to his best friend. But ultimately, this idea snowballed, and it became, we have to kill Hanna May, Frankie, little Chris, and big Chris. And then, like I said, on site, that Kenneth got added on to that, or after they had already agreed to their main targets. And again, Jake will tell you freely that they knew there might be other people there, and they knew that they would kill them, even though they were perfectly innocent. He will tell you that they started making plans for this thing in January, which was, a month after they had read that comment by Hanna May that they will have to kill me first. He understood that he would probably not end up with custody if he went the legal route. His attorney had told him that in Ohio, because you weren't married, the law favors the mother, that you're not likely to get full custody. And he believed that. He also believed what he had read, that Hanna May would never sign custody papers over to him. So he believed the only way to get sole control of his daughter was to kill Hanna May and her family members. He will admit that he purchased the silencer parts, that they purchased a truck specifically for this, to commit this offense in. He will admit that Angela Wagner bought the shoes for he and George to wear the night of the homicides, again, trying to make it different sizes than what they normally wore, and to make it a different kind of shoe than they would be caught dead in, frankly. They usually wore boots and usually did not wear tennis shoes, especially that kind of make and style. So he admits that. And the same idea was for the murder truck, the truck that they used for the murder. You will hear that Billy overheard his cousin saying, or his uncle saying, that he was selling a car. He was talking to Silas Wagner is his name. He was talking to another individual and said that he would sell this truck that he had for $2,500, and Billy said, "We'll buy it." And that was one day, and then shortly thereafter, Silas will tell you that Jake and George and Angela came up to his property and gave him the $2,500 for that truck. Jake will tell you that they modified the truck. They built a false bed where the eye hooks were. There's a level plane, and then there's some eye hooks kind of on top of that. He put the 2x4s up and then put plywood and then put hay on top of that, so it would look like the bed was full of hay. And instead, that's where he and George stowed away when they drove up to Chris Sr.'s that night with their weapons and everything they needed for that night. He would tell you what they wore. They wore ski masks. They wore dark clothing. There was some concern that Brentley might recognize Jake because he had seen Jake on many occasions, and Sophia had always been able to recognize Jake even when he was in costume. He will tell you that they made plans with Chris Sr., Billy made plans with Chris Sr. about this imaginary drug deal. And so he was going to drive up to talk to Chris Sr. about that drug deal that night. And still don't know if it's a real thing or not, or if this was all just a feigned way for him to go up there. But that way Chris Sr. would be expecting them, right? So there no alarms would be sounded. They went up there around 10:30 p.m., first meeting at their house at 260 Peterson. Billy had come to Peterson driving his red dually. They had signed the custody documents that we had found. His mom had, Googled that and printed it and filled it out, and they just signed their name to it. He will acknowledge that they watched the Boondock Saints video clip before they left that night. He and George, anyhow, he remembers. And that when it was time to go, they walked out into the barn where the truck was that they had modified. They purposely kept it out of sight of the neighbors and stuff by parking it back behind that new barn, and changed their clothes out there. They didn't want to leave any shoe prints of those brand new Walmart shoes anywhere on their property until they were ready to get into the truck. And they got into the bed of the truck, and Billy drove the truck up to see his friend. And they remained in the back of that bed of the truck until such time as Billy came out and lowered the gate for them, at which point they slithered, I think was the word he used, out of the truck, and got underneath that truck, and George got under that truck, and Jake got under Chris Sr.'s truck, which is, they had parked their vehicle right by one of Chris Sr.'s trucks. George had the SKS at that time. Again, that was his gun. Jake didn't really even like the gun. And George, the plan was that George was going to shoot Chris Sr. from a distance, like a sniper, in a fashion that Chris would never know what hit him, would never know that Billy Wagner was betraying him or whatever. Of course, Gary was there also. They went out to an outdoor grow. They walked back in front of the house, and I should probably, you want to, okay.
Judge, can we reposition ourselves to see the...
Yes, certainly, yeah.
Where are you going to put it?
I'm just going to hold it. So, at the point that Chris and Gary were walking back this way, Billy leading a single file, that's when George was supposed to shoot Chris at that point. Again, just so, and this is when you guys saw it, the trailer wasn't there, but this structure was there, and this is the garage, and then again, this is the path leading over towards Frankie's. You guys see that? But when he was basically walking in front of the trailer is when they were supposed to shoot him, so that he would not know. That's State's Exhibit A544. Jake will tell you, however, that George was taking too long and seemed to be frozen. He didn't know if it was because I neglected to tell you this. So that thing that we dug out of the well, the silencer that we dug out of the well, had all the parts that they had purchased to make the silencer. That was a prototype, but it had failed, right? And so they scrapped that idea and they decided to use filters instead, fuel filters instead. So they had a silencer made out of a filter on both the SKS and the 1911. So the 40 Glock was the only weapon that did not have a silencer on it. So Matt White was right about all of the involved weapons. It was a 40 Glock, it was a 1911 22, and it was a high-powered 30 caliber SKS. So Jake didn't know if it was because the fuel filter was blocking his view, because Jake said when he had test fired the weapon, he found that to be an issue. Either way, ultimately, Jake took the weapon from George, and Billy at some point came back out to where they were and were questioning them why they hadn't shot. And at that time, Billy came up with a ruse of asking Chris Sr. to call his phone. I don't know where my phone is. Can you call it so I can find my phone? Well, truth be told, all the phones belonging to Billy and Jake and George were left back at Peterson Road, actually with instructions to Angela, who remained back at the home with Bullvine and Sophia, to text people or use the phone so it would appear that they were at home this whole time, providing them an alibi. Of note, the phone jammer had worked when they tested it, but the battery ran out very quickly, Jake will tell you, and so it didn't work for long at all. And so you will see, I told you that 10:55 p.m. Time was very important. It's very important because that's when Chris Sr., at the request of his friend Billy Wagner, made calls to his friend's phone so that his friend could find his phone. And really all that did was take him to the front door so that Jake could shoot him. And so we kind of know the time of death of Chris Sr. because it was shortly after making that phone call. He was standing in the doorway. That's why we have that SKS high-powered rifle that is shooting through the doorway and forcing the wood into his skin. Again, you will see that it broke his arm. And Billy was still inside of the residence, according to Jake, with the 40 Glock, where he shot both Billy or Chris and Gary. And they had multiple gunshot. I think Chris Sr. had 9 total gunshot wounds. Gary, I believe, had 5. I'm going to be wrong on that. Maybe 3. But they were shot Gary was shot entirely in the head. You will see that his glasses and his ball cap flew off. The projectile actually took that off of his head. And he will say at that point, Billy came running out of the residence and was hysterical, saying, "I just shot my best friend. I just shot my best friend." And it talks about the look that Chris gave him when he realized what was happening. Jake will tell you that he and George tried to calm Billy down, and that Jake went inside the residence and retrieved keys that he knew to be in Chris Sr.'s pocket to go to the grow that was in that here, where the cameras were, so that he could remove the cameras. he did that, George and Billy drug the bodies of Gary Rhoden and Chris Sr. back to the bedroom of Chris Sr. Jake knows that because when he came back down, their bodies had been moved. And they then, I don't think they did anything else then. They then went down to check Frankie's residence. They found that it was locked. That was kind of a recent occurrence because when Brentley is there, he has a tendency to escape out the front door. And so they installed the chain lock and the lock. And they decided that they would return to that location later. So they went back to Chris Sr.'s, and the idea became that we would get into Chris Sr.'s truck and travel to Dana's house. The idea being, if you arrive in Chris Sr.'s truck, no one's going to be alarmed when you pull in the driveway at that hour of night, right? But they drove by Dana's, and Dana was not yet there. And I think I told you earlier that they claimed that she was not a main target, yet they didn't take that opportunity to enter the residence and kill Hanna May and little Chris, whom they were determined to kill. They went back. They said at that time they drove down to Left Fork to see what the status was at Kenneth's residence. They just drove by the residence at that time. And this is why we took you on this wild goose chase on the jury view. We were literally taking you the path that they took that night, including the walking to Frankie's first and then, walking back. Once back at Chris Sr.'s, they then decided to go to Frankie's. Jake will tell you that he entered through there was an open window at the back of the trailer. Again, keep in mind that this is a trailer that he has been in before. And he went then to the back door, and he will tell you first he tried to pry open the back door with a knife, and he claims that it broke the tip off and didn't open up he couldn't get the door to open, so that's why he entered into the window. But then he went there and opened up the back door so that George and Billy could enter the Frankie and Hazel's. Then he went back. He will tell you that Brentley was asleep on that couch upon entering the residence. There was a couch in the living room, and the TV was on. And he went back to the room where he knew Hanna, Hazel, and Frankie would be sleeping, and shot both of them with the 1911 .22. He will tell you that he looked around for their phones but couldn't find them. And that was another thing I forgot to mention, is that he did take the phones of Chris Sr. So all we had were the phone records, which told us the tolls, not content. And they left that residence. They went back to Chris Sr.'s again and got into the vehicle, to Chris Sr.'s vehicle, and they went to Dana's. There, they entered that residence. Jake will tell you that both George and Billy entered the residence. Billy with the .40, George with the SKS. They didn't know, again, they thought maybe Chris would have a friend over. They thought maybe Corey Holdren would be there, so they needed to make sure that nothing went awry. And so George was spaced, and Jake will show you exactly where in that scene that he was planted. The interesting thing is that he indicated that he wore the size 10.5 that night, and that George wore the size 11 that night. And you will see that size 11 that I told you that was in scene 3 at Dana's place is almost exactly where he says that George was stationed, to make sure that little Chris didn't come out of his room with a weapon while he was off killing the women in the trailer. He will tell you that he went into a hallway, and again, we will show you this with crime scene photos, etc. But he basically positioned himself so that he could see both Hanna and Dana. He could tell that Dana was on her phone because it was kind of lighting up her face. He will tell you that she made a noise, that he said he kind of froze initially, but she made a noise which jolted her out of it. And Kylie started crying, and he says he took 2 quick steps into Dana's room and shot her twice, and then immediately rushed back to where Hanna was. And he will tell you that Hanna obviously heard him because she was laying with her left side to the doorway and turned to look. She had been nursing Kylie and saw him. He doesn't believe she recognized him, but she saw him and he shot her. He will tell you that after he shot her, he rearranged her body on the bed so that Kylie could nurse if she wanted to. And he will say that he went back into Dana's room and shot her more times because she was making noises. And then he will tell you that he went out of the door that led from Dana's room into the kitchen. And when he opened the door, his dad was standing there with the .40 drawn, probably in a just-in-case, situation. And George was still behind his father, guarding little Chris's room. He will tell you that Jake claims that he then went to little Chris's room and also shot little Chris, who had never woken up. He was asleep at the time he was killed. Again, he removed all the phones. He will tell you that although that sounds like a very long time, it actually happened all very quickly. They then went back and got into Chris's car. This time they drove back to Chris's car and got their truck that they had brought up there, the one that they had purchased from Silas Wagner. And the cars followed each other. So at that point, Billy was driving the truck that they had, Chris's truck, and George was driving the truck that they had purchased. And they went down to Left Fork, and again, you'll see this on the surveillance cameras. And Jake will say that there was a little turnoff that we kind of showed you, at a little intersection down there close to Left Fork, that's where they had George pull off. He was kind of a lookout / getaway driver in the event that things went bad. Again, they were driving Chris's truck right up to Kenneth's driveway. Kenneth had an electric sensor. His daughter will tell you that if he had taken his blood pressure medication, he's a very heavy sleeper. And that's the only thing she can guess as to why he didn't wake up. But his door is unlocked when he's sleeping inside of it because he padlocks it when he leaves it. So the padlock's on the outside, not on the inside. And Jake states that Billy entered that residence and he claims he saw a flash of light and that Billy killed him with the .40 caliber Glock. At that point, there again was cameras to remove at that location because he had a kind of a mini grow, and they did that and removed a trail cam from a tree as well. Jake confirms to us, like I said, that both he and George dyed their hair that week. Again, he stated that he wanted to look like Norman Reedus. He states that George helped modify the truck, that George signed the custody documents just like he did, and that George rode in the back of the truck with him up there and helped move Chris and Gary's bodies. And like I said, that he would have shot little Chris if he came out of the room, and that he was wearing the size 11 shoe that night. After they were done at Kenneth's, they drove back up to Chris Sr.'s. They left Chris Sr.'s truck there and got in the vehicle that they had purchased from Silas Wagner and drove back to Peterson Road, where they kind of just undid everything they did, right? They parked the truck in the barn. They got out of those clothes. They put on their original clothing. And Jake will say that they burned and tried to destroy the weapons, cut up the weapons, and destroy specifically the firing pins and other things that would enable BCI or anybody to do ballistics on them. And that they dug a hole in the barn and buried put it in a duffel bag and buried it temporarily. He will tell you that in the meantime, once they also disassembled the truck, the fake false bed in the truck, and that Billy then took the truck to his niece, Billy's niece, Katie Wagner. Katie Wagner is the daughter of Billy's brother, Bobby. They live in Athens, and you will hear from them as well that kind of out of the blue, Billy Wagner shows up with a truck for Katie. Before the sun had even risen, unannounced, unplanned, unpredicted. And of course, Katie was not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. She was happy to have a truck, and she got it titled in her name the same day. And you will see that it was titled in her name on April 22nd of 2016. Billy had Bobby taken back to the farm, and because he didn't have any other way to get back, and Bobby will tell you that when he arrived, both Jake and George were outside of the house, and they led him into the old barn, not the new barn where they had been doing their dirty deeds, but the new barn, and had him look at a pig or something. And ultimately, he said he went into the residence with the three of them, Jake, George, and Billy. Jake will tell you that obviously they planned this for months, and their plan was not only to kill these people, but also to get away with it. They didn't want to get caught. So they took great measures to do that. One of those great measures was to not talk on phones, not even talk in the house unless you ran water nearby. They would go outside and talk. They just pretty much assumed that everything was bugged. And once they firmly believed that they were being listened to, they started to throw their conversation, accordingly. And you can very much see that in the recorded conversations that we have. He also tells us what he did with the murder weapons. That was something that we were told before we even sat down and talked with him, because as you might imagine, we were a little bit leery, but we were told that he would lead us to the murder weapons. So he did. He told us that after the homicides and after they had buried those items and burned a lot of the items as well, that anything that was left over, they had 5-gallon buckets of concrete, and they dropped the stuff in 4 different buckets of concrete. And then they made a goose box for their grandfather, Robert Wagner, the father, Bobby Wagner, not the brother. And they gave it to him for Father's Day that year, and floated it on the pond, that big pond that you saw out there, and used the concrete buckets full of the murder weapons as anchors. You'll hear they fished out there all the time. So that obviously was something that they could see every day. And you were directed to the part of the pond where it was. It was that back right corner, and we had you even walk up on that embankment and drew your attention to the structure that was there. That was the goose box. It ultimately sank. But armed with this information, we were able to get a search warrant and go out there, and we did recover those concrete buckets and took them to the lab at BCI, where they were broken up, chiseled out, soaked in oil, and recovered multiple weapon parts belonging to an SKS, the 1911, the 40 Glock. Even though they were in parts, the firing pin had not been damaged. So Matt White, who is our ballistics expert, will tell you that he was able to test fire those. They have the ability in the lab to hold the gun together so it doesn't explode apart. And he was able to make positive identifications with the ballistics on both the 22 and the 40 Glock. So we know without a doubt that those were the murder weapons that were used that Jake led us to. On the bottom of the pond at the Flying W. They were all there when they put that goose box in there: Jake, George, Billy, Angela. After that, we, being the skeptic of the pirate, right? We made an offer to the rest of the individuals that if anyone came forward, we purposely did not release Jake's statement. We did not provide that to anybody. Nobody except the attorneys and our lead agent knew the contents of that proffer. And we said that if anyone else came forward and could tell us something that was consistent with what we had just heard, that would do two things for us. It would demonstrate that Jake was telling us the truth, right? And it would just be stronger corroborating evidence that another member of the Wagner family was giving us the same information without knowing exactly what Jake had said, right? And that person that came forward was Angela Wagner. She came forward in September of 2021, about 5 months after Jake had come forward. Her deal was a little better, a lot better, actually. She agreed to a 30-year sentence. Obviously, she's older. She will be almost 80 when she gets out under that deal. It's still a really hard pill to swallow because she freely admits. Quite honestly, you could tell that Jake tried to minimize his mom's involvement, kind of also tried to minimize George's involvement to some extent, but Angela did not. Angela did not minimize her own involvement. In fact, she will tell you that it was her idea to begin with, and that she nagged and nagged and nagged Billy to figure out a solution to the problem. The problem being that we're losing control of Sophia, right? She's over here and we don't know what's going on with her. Keep an eye on her when she's over there. When you go up to Chris's, keep an eye on her and make sure she's okay. I think Billy reported that Frankie was too affectionate, according to Angela. Of course, now again, this contradicts what Jake said, which was that nothing had happened and this was basically a preemptive killing. But she admits that she was very concerned about Sophia. They all were. And that they would do anything to protect Sophia, and that she told her husband that she was concerned, and that's where the ideas were born. She admits that she bought the phone jammer knowing that it was going to be used to jam the phones on that night so that they could not call for help. She admits that she bought the bug detector, which was to detect any bugging devices that the investigation team might use after the fact. And she admits to buying the shoes for her sons, which of course she had already admitted to at the border. She admits to Googling and printing out those custody documents, to forging Hanna May's name to those documents, to also forging her mother's notary signature. She admits that on that night that she was told to work with the phones so that it would appear that both Jake and George were still at the residence and using their phones. She will tell you that they all three left the house that night, and they all three came back in with different shirts on than what they had left with. She will tell you that when they went to buy the truck from Silas Wagner, that it was George that got the money from the safe in order to purchase that truck, although she did say that George advised that he didn't think it was smart to buy it off of a family member because it could be traced back to them. She will tell you that after the fact, that she confided in her husband, Billy, that she felt guilty for dragging Jake and George into this because they should have just taken it on themselves because that was a lot to put on Jake and George. And she had noticed that George was having nightmares, and she's telling Billy this. And Billy's response was, I don't know why he would have nightmares. He didn't shoot anybody. So again, she will also tell you that at one point she was very upset when we interviewed her at the border, and she didn't have a good story for the shoes, and she just admitted that she bought it for the boys and then said she threw them away the same day, and she knew that was not a very believable story, and she was very worried that she had ruined it for them. And George made the comment that he had tried to wipe off the shoe prints that were left at the scene at Chris Sr.'s. She will tell you that George helped to build the goose box, they were plans that Billy brought down to them, but that Jake and George built it in the driveway. She admits to the Facebook hacking and said that she did it to benefit George, but that they just inadvertently saw this messaging back and forth. She indicates that she had a conversation with George in the kitchen. A lot of conversations in this family happen in the kitchen. That's where they have a lot of their family meetings. And checked in with him to make sure he was okay with the plan. She will state that everyone was, quote, reluctant, but understood that they needed to do this in order to protect Sophia, and everybody, including George, would do anything to protect Sophia. She had admitted that she initially said that we should just rat Chris Sr. out and that they were not willing to do that. She also admitted to threatening to get a gun when Tabitha was fleeing the residence and to throw in a 2x4 at Tabitha. So we kind of asked her about some of those kinds of things as well. Both Jake and Angela admitted a lot of other stuff as well, some other crimes, but we'll cover that when I'm reviewing the criminal charges with you, because there's actually a charge that they are charged with in this indictment as functioning as a criminal enterprise. So we'll talk about that. She acknowledged that they have family meetings and take votes, and that each one of them would do anything to protect the children. And again, we talked about it during voir dire that you want to corroborate the pirates, right? You want to corroborate their story, and here's how they're corroborated, right? We pulled the murder weapons out of the pond exactly in the location and this condition that Jake told us we would. Angela corroborates Jake just in not knowing what Jake said and saying identical things. Bobby and Julia and Katie Wagner all confirmed that Billy arrived with this truck unannounced. And another thing that Katie Wagner tells us is that after the Wagners came back from Alaska, she was out at the Flying W taking pictures for Frederica of the horses, of some of the horses, and, you know, for advertising purposes. And she will tell you that Billy cleaned her car that day when she was there. So again, this was after we had already laser focused on the Wagners. They knew we were looking into them, and so he obviously got concerned that there was some remaining forensic evidence even after a couple of years. Angela saw him doing it and asked him what he was doing, and he said that he was just making sure that there was nothing left. And basically, Silas Wagner also verifies in the purchase of the truck from him, saying that Billy negotiated it and that Jake and George and Angela showed up shortly thereafter with the cash and purchased the truck from him. So again, a lot of the things that they told us, plus, of course, all of the evidence that we had even before Jake and Angela came forward to us. At this point, I would like to review the criminal charges in the indictment. And, you know, it's a 22-count indictment, so this is just the preamble, which is within or for the body of the County of Pike or by some manner enumerated in this code section whereby proper venue is placed in Pike. So I think I talked to you about there was a dispute whether Dana's was in Adam or Pike. Peterson Road is in Pike. We know they committed a lot of their offenses there, the Facebook hacking, the purchasing, the building of silencers, etc. But it doesn't matter as long as one of the offenses happened in Pike County. And that's really not an issue for you, but I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so counts 1 through 8 are the aggravated murder charges, okay? On or about the 22nd of April. At the County of Pike and in the state of Ohio did unlawfully and purposefully, with prior calculation and design, cause the death of another. I know we talked a lot about this with you guys during individual voir dire, but this is the purposeful causing the death of another with prior calculation and design. Clearly, when you have at least 3 months of preparation, prior calculation and design is very clear in this case. Okay, so counts 1 through 8, the first count is for Kenneth, the second count is Chris Rhoden Sr., the third count is Gary Rhoden, the fourth count is Frankie, the fifth count is Hazel Gilley, the sixth count is Dana Rhoden, the seventh count is Hanna May Rhoden, and the eighth count is Christopher Rhoden Jr. Before Jake confessed, we actually thought that Kenneth was killed first, because we knew he got up at 4:30 in the morning, and we figured they went to him first, basically. So, so that was one thing that we did not have right. Okay, so there are specifications on 1 through 8, right? So this says specification 1 to the first count, but this is just to show you. This specification is on all 8 counts. And it's just that he had a firearm on or about his person or under his control while committing the said aggravated murder. So the reason we go over the elements and the offenses with you is just so when you're seeing the evidence, you can fit it into one of these offenses or just know what you're, should be looking for. The second specification is that not only that he had the firearm on his person or under his control, but that he displayed the firearm, brandished it, indicated that he had it, or used it to facilitate the aggravated murder. The third count is that there was a firearm that is automatic firearm or that was equipped with a firearm muffler or suppressor on or about his person or under his control. And we'll talk about complicity at the end of this, although certainly he had possession of the SKS at one point and, at several points. And that was equipped with a silencer. Specification 4 is that he committed the said aggravated murder for the purpose of escaping detection, apprehension, trial, or punishment for another offense committed by the said George Washington. So this is, again, on all 8 counts, and basically the concept I told you about how some of these people that were killed were collateral damage because they would know it was the Wagners that had committed these offenses, and that they would, get arrested or punished for committing the offenses as a result. The 5th specification is that it was a part of course of conduct involving the purposeful killing of or attempt to kill 2 or more persons. Obviously, you have 8 individuals here that were killed. This is that multiple victim specification we talked to you a lot about in individual voir dire. And then specification 6 is that he committed the aggravated murder while he was attempting to commit, or fleeing immediately after committing or attempting to commit aggravated burglary. And either he was the principal offender, or if not the principal offender, that the aggravated murder was with prior calculation and design. Okay, so again, we'll talk more about this when we discuss complicity, but even if he wasn't the principal offender, i.e. didn't pull the trigger on this person or that person, if there's prior calculation and design, that doesn't matter. So that's a specification. And I would note, you note that Jake admits to killing 5 of the 8 individuals, but he pled to all 8 of them, right? Because he's guilty of aggravated murder as to all of them. Because even if he wasn't the one who pulled the trigger, he was complicit in it. And you'll learn when we talk about complicity, and we talked about that in voir dire, you can be charged just as the principal offender, in the same language as the principal offender. Okay, so this is a really, really, really long one, and I apologize because this is actually the language of it, because you have to put a lot of language into it. So we will just kind of review this. This is between the 1st of January of 2016, January 2016 being when we believe they started planning, or when they acknowledged they started planning, through November 12th of 2018, because they were arrested. Again, either in Pike County or someplace that it's properly brought, did with the purpose to commit or promote or facilitate the commission of aggravated murder and or aggravated burglary with another person or persons, and then we just list his co-defendants, right? Angela Wagner, Billy Wagner, which is George Washington Wagner III, and Jake Wagner, and or any other unidentified or unknown individuals plan or aid in the commission of any of the said aggravated murders, murder, and or aggravated burglaries, and or agree with another person or persons to wit, Angela Jo Wagner, and or George Washington Wagner III, and or Edward Jacob Wagner, and or any other unidentified and or unknown individuals that one or more of them would engage in conduct that facilitates the commission of any of the said aggravated murders, murder, and or aggravated burglaries. And subsequent to his entering into this conspiracy, a substantial overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy was committed by him or a person with whom he was conspiring, including but not limited to the following overt acts. And then we just list some of the things that they did in preparation for this, right? Making several purchases in the months leading up to the aggravated murders and or aggravated burglaries, including but not limited to specific shoes from Walmart, brass catcher, items with which to build a brass catcher. I don't think I mentioned that they purchased bait net at the same time that they purchased a brass catcher. Ammunition, a magazine clip, a bug detector, and or parts to build a silencer, and or various other items in preparation of those crimes. Building a silencer, forging documents, including forged custody documents, obtaining and sharing information regarding the victims and their properties, in preparation for these crimes to include their habits and routines, sleeping locations, physical layout of property, counter surveillance devices present on the properties. I forgot to mention a couple of things. They also admit that, Angela admits that Billy scolded them for buying that DVR camera thing in March of 2016 and told them to get rid of it. So Jake and George had painstakingly put those devices up around the house, and then once they were told by Billy to remove them, they removed it, and they decided they needed to burn it to make sure there was no evidence, because Billy was like, that will catch us coming and going the night of the murders, right? So that is what that is. In preparation for these claims to sharing information regarding the victims, I failed to tell you that Jake Wagner, Hanna May kept asking for the crib that belonged to Sophia so she could use it for Kylie, and he kept putting it off. And finally, the week of the homicides, he agreed to come over and set it up for her. So he was inside that residence the week of the homicides, I'm sure, scoping it out and figuring out the lay of the land. He also was making surreptitious videos anytime he would drop off or pick up Sophia, and there was time where he was questioning Hanna May when she still was living at the residence that Frankie and Hazel were living at, about a lock on Frankie's door. So they definitely were doing this, scoping that out and sharing that kind of information. Illegal monitoring of the various social media accounts, that Facebook hacking that I talked about, destroying or tampering with evidence of the crimes, including but not limited to the video recording that he had purchased, a silencer, video and trail cameras belonging to the victims, phones belonging to some of the victims, moving the body of Christopher Rhoden Sr. and or the body of Gary Rhoden, providing false or misleading information to the authorities, and or various other known and unknown overt acts, and or one of the objects of the conspiracy is aggravated murder, or an offense for which the maximum penalty is imprisonment for life. So again, that it kind of requires you to articulate all that, whereas normally you don't have to articulate all that. But that is just conspiracy to commit murder or aggravated murder. Okay, aggravated burglary are counts 10 through 13. So again, it's just those 4 locations where they entered into the residence. And you can see again that because Kenneth's location is first, that we thought he was the first at the time of the indictment. But it's 1084. You're going to hear 799 Left Fork sometimes because he didn't have a box. And so when Donald Stone calls 911, he doesn't know the address. And then the location where Frankie and Hazel lived, location with Chris Sr. and Gary Rhoden, and then finally the location where Dana and Hanna May and little Chris lived. But basically that you unlawfully by force, stealth, or deception trespass an occupied structure when another person other than an accomplice is present in the structure. Obviously, there were people present in all 4 of these structures when they entered. And they either inflicted physical harm on another and or had a deadly weapon or dangerous ordinance on or about the said person. So again, that applies to all 4 locations. And again, you have a firearm specification just for him having a gun on his person. And then you have a second specification for having a gun, not only having the gun, but brandishing it or using it to facilitate the crime. And then the suppressor specification. The next count is an unlawful possession of dangerous ordnance. This just states that between, again, that 1st of January of 2016, when we know they start preparing and buying, although we do see them buying most of the items in February and March of that year, but did unlawfully and knowingly acquire, have, carry, or use any dangerous ordinance. A dangerous ordinance is a suppressor, so that fits the definition. And then again, 2 specifications on this for having a firearm on this person, and then also for having it or brandishing it when he's committing that unlawful possession of a dangerous ordinance. So there's only 2 specifications on that. Okay, and then we get to some of the tampering with evidence charges. Did unlawfully know that an official proceeding or investigation was in progress or was likely, about to be or likely to be instituted, alter, destroy, conceal, or remove any record, document, or thing to it,
the phones, cameras, and other items belonging to the victims. Obviously, they removed those to remove kind of the conversations that they had been having, to kind of thwart the investigation. This is April 3rd of 2016, so this is when the custody documents were generated. And again, knowing that an official proceeding or investigation was in progress or was likely about to be or likely to be instituted, make, present, or use any record, document, or thing to wit custody documents, knowing it to be false, and with purpose to mislead a public official who is or may be engaged in such proceeding or investigation, or with purpose to corrupt the outcome of any such proceeding or investigation. And that would apply both to custody proceedings and to this proceeding. And then the last tampering with evidence is, again, between that January of 16 through May 9th of 2017, which is when we did the search warrant on Peterson Road, did unlawfully, knowing that official proceeding was likely to be instituted, destroy a thing, so the silencer that we found in the well, shell casings, and or parts of the home security system, anything that we found burned up at that location. Forgery, again, we've kind of talked about this, but forging the custody documents without the other person's authority and or did forge any writing to it custody documents so that it purports to be genuine when it actually is spurious, or to be the act of another who did not authorize that act, or to have been executed at a time or place or with terms different from what in fact was the case. They will tell you Angela did not notice that April 3rd, 2016. It spits out of your, on that thing, so. And she did say that Jake signed his document and George signed his document, so, as did Jake. July 1, 2014 through May 2017. This is unauthorized use of property. This is the Facebook hacking of both Tabitha and Tabitha's mother and indirectly anybody that they talked to. But again, did knowingly gain access to or attempt to gain access or cause access to be gained to any computer system, network, cable service, cable system, telecommunications device, telecommunications service, or information service, to wit, the social media, without the scope, the consent of, or beyond the scope of express or implied consent of the owner of the computer system, etc. So obviously Tabitha did not mean for George and Angela to be spying on her through her Facebook to get evidence to use against her. Obstructing justice, this is between the date of the homicide through the date of arrest. Did unlawfully with purpose to hinder the discovery, apprehension, prosecution, conviction, or punishment of another, and again, co-defendants, because it has to be another, not yourself, to benefit from the commission of a crime, to destroy or conceal physical evidence of the crime or act, or induce any person to withhold testimony or information, or to elude legal process summoning the person to testify or supply evidence, and or did communicate false information to any person and or the crimes committed by the said co-defendants are felonies. So, again, this is just trying to induce Rita to give false testimony, all the cover-up that they tried to engage in to try to conceal that they committed this crime, and the false information that they provided to the state. Okay, this is, again, another very wordy one, but this is the one where I talked about engaging in a criminal enterprise. Some of the things that I mentioned to you that we found out, and we found out along the way, but both Jake and Angela admit to these other offenses that they have committed as a family, basically. So the first and foremost was, I talked to you about Bethel Hill Road and how, there was that home where they lived that you guys saw, but then on the way down, we had to pay attention to the location where the first home existed. Well, the first home burned down, and the story was that they were deep frying a turkey, and up in flames. And Angela was off with the kids, and et cetera. And the reason we found it suspicious was because they had removed all their belongings. There was a favorite picture that Angela had that somehow survived the fire. Deer heads, et cetera. So, but they both admit that that was an intentional fire for the purpose of collecting insurance, right? Other times they have done that, a semi-trailer that they burned for benefit. They would talk about when they were driving truck, Billy and Jake and George would steal gas from other semis. Angela scouted it because she said sometimes it took more time to, drive around and find the perfect thing. You lose time, you lose money when you're a truck driver. So things like that, Billy taught Jake to pick locks, just various crimes that they committed as a family. Angela and Billy were convicted of stealing stuff from various department stores and such, but they were taught to steal and such. So those are just some of the other examples that you will hear, but basically, again, through that January of 16 through the date of arrest, while associated with an enterprise, to wit, a group of persons associated in fact, including but not limited to immediate family members of George Wagner, and then I list the 3 co-defendants, and or Rita Newcomb, who was, at the time participating in this forgery cover-up, and or John Doe, and or Frederica Wagner, and or any other unidentified or unknown individuals did conduct or participate in, directly or indirectly, the affairs of the enterprise through a pattern of corrupt activity or the collection of an unlawful debt, to wit, engaging either individually or while being aided and abetted by members of the enterprise who facilitated the incidences of corrupt activity in conduct constituting the offenses, including but not limited to the following: aggravated murder, aggravated burglary, unlawful possession of a dangerous ordinance, tampering with evidence, obstructing justice, and I put in there to include but not limited to the acts alleged in this indictment in counts 1 through 20, which are incorporated as if fully rewritten herein. Or at least one of the incidents of corrupt activity is a felony of the first, second, or third degree, aggravated murder and or murder. So again, another wordy one, I apologize. And again, specification to that count is having the firearm, and the second one is for brandishing or using it to facilitate the engaging in a pattern of corrupt activity. And the third specification is in regards to the silencer or suppressor. Okay, so I said that we would talk about complicity because we covered that in voir dire, and the judge will certainly instruct you at the end of this. And we talked about that, right? The person that boosts you up to get you in the window of the house, or the person that's driving the getaway driver at the bank robbery is just as accountable as the person who actually goes into the bank, or the person that actually. And I will note that just because, so in Angela Wagner's plea, we could not have her plea to aggravated murder because that's a life sentence automatically. And so we had to pick charges that would give her flat time, right? So, but just because we, dismissed those, she was every bit as guilty of the aggravated murders as the 3 boys were, right? Jake, George, and Billy. Even though she didn't go up on the hill that night, even though she wasn't out at Left Fork, even though she didn't hold a gun, she plotted and planned and, helped to execute that plan. So she certainly could have been convicted of, held responsible for the aggravated murder. She did plead to some aggravated burglaries, and as you know, there's nothing in my story so far that says that she went into any of these homes. So again, that's all under the complicity theory. So the court will instruct you at the end of this for any of these counts. And, not knowing at the time, who's behind the computer when they're Facebook hacking, right? We don't know that until they tell us, right? We knew it was the Wagner computer, but we didn't know who was operating it. So basically all of these individuals were charged as principal offenders, but with the idea that they can be held accountable under the complicity statute, okay? That makes sense. So basically, in order to be complicit, you have to act with the kind of culpability required for the commission of offense. So you have to know that murder was on the minds of your co-conspirators, right? Your complicitors. Solicit or procure another to commit the offense, aid or abet another in committing the offense, conspire with another to commit the offense, or cause an innocent or irresponsible person to commit the offense. So obviously, up there, I would say the 2 and 3 apply most to George Wagner in any of the offenses where he was not the principal offender, if you feel that he's not the principal offender. So this is just a furtherance of the complicity statute that says it's not a defense to a charge under this section that no person with whom the accused was in complicity has been convicted as a principal offender. Well, that has happened here. There are 2 individuals that have been convicted thus far. And no person shall be convicted of complicity unless an offense is actually committed. But a person can be convicted of complicity in an attempt to commit an offense. So again, that doesn't really apply so much for here. And this is just, again, we talked to you about that grave suspicion that the testimony of an accomplice does not become inadmissible because he was complicit or moral turpitude or self-interest, but the admitted or claimed complicity of a witness may affect his credibility and make his testimony subject to grave suspicion and require that it be weighed with great caution. And we talked about that. And I would submit to you that you will learn that pretty much everything that both Jake and Angela told us has been corroborated in other aspects. And then just that it's up to you as jurors. And this just summarizes that whoever violates this section is guilty of complicity in the commission of an offense and shall be prosecuted and punished as if he were the principal offender. A charge of complicity may be stated in terms of this section or in terms of the principal offense. So we stated it in terms of the principal offense, right? We said he purposely, with prior calculation design, killed this person. We didn't say he was complicit or he aided and abetted in that. But it's understood, I guess, is what I'm trying to suggest here. Okay. Again, I go back to Hanna May's statement that we now know the Wagners all saw. I won't sign papers ever. It won't happen. They will have to kill me first. And again, that word they. This is not a guilt by association. If anything, that is what happened to the 8 individuals that got killed that night. They got killed just for being there. Talk about guilt by association. This is guilt by participation. Because George Wagner participated in the planning, he participated in the preparation. I don't know if I recall if I told you that George or Jake also said he helped him build the frame for the false bed. But he participated in all of that preparation, the purchases. He purchased oil filters on April 18th of 2016, 3 days before the homicides. Participation in one of the most heinous crimes that has ever been committed in the state of Ohio and hopefully will never be committed again. He participated in planning, preparing, purchasing, executing, and covering up these crimes. Please weigh all the evidence and information that you hear from the witness stand and from the exhibits. Consider it all very carefully, and we are convinced that by the end of this trial, you will have no doubt in your mind that this defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of each and every charge in the indictment. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is defense counsel ready to give?
Judge, perhaps we could take a short break.
All right. We'll take about as short as we can take it is about 15 minutes because it takes about that long to get this many people to the bathroom and so forth. So we will be in recess for 15 minutes. You all know the rules, but let me repeat them anyway. While you're on break, you're not to discuss this case with anyone. You're not to permit this case to be discussed with you or in your presence. You're not to form or express an opinion concerning this case until it's finally submitted to you for deliberation and verdict. You're not to do any research at all concerning this case, either as to the facts or as to the law. You're not to view, listen to, or read any reports or accounts concerning this case from any source whatsoever, and that includes, but is not limited to, internet, Facebook, social media of any kind, radio, television, or newspapers. You're not to have any contact with participants in the trial. That would, of course, include parties, attorneys, or witnesses. So with that, we are in recess for 15 minutes. Please assemble in 15 minutes down at the jury room. You'll be brought up from there. I have 2:29, so let's make it 2:45. All right.